Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
He was dead, the head of a high tribunal, the upright magistrate whose irreproachable life was a proverb in all the courts of France. Advocates, young counselors, judges had greeted him at the sight of his large, thin, pale face, lighted up by two sparkling, deep-set eyes, bowing low in token of respect. He had passed his life in pursuing crime and in protecting the weak. Swindlers and murderers had no more redoubtable the enemy, for he seemed to read the most secret thoughts of their minds. He was dead now, at the age of 82, honored by the homage and followed by the regrets of a whole people. Soldiers in red trousers had escorted him to the tomb, and men in white cravats had spoken words and shed tears that seemed to be sincere beside his grave. But here is the strange paper found by the dismayed notary in the desk where he had kept the records of great criminals. It was entitled, Why?
20th June, 1851. I have just left court. I have condemned Blondel to death. Now, why did this man kill his 5 children? Frequently one meets with people to whom the destruction of life is a pleasure. Yes, it should be a pleasure, the greatest of all, perhaps. For is not killing the next thing to creating? To make and to destroy. These 2 words contain the history of the universe, all the history of worlds, all that is all. Why is it not intoxicating to kill? 25th June. To think that a being is there who lives, who walks, who runs. A being? What is a being? That animated thing that bears in it the principle of motion and a will ruling that motion. It is attached to nothing, this thing. Its feet do not belong on the ground. It is a grain of life that moves on the earth, and this grain of life, coming I know not whence, one can destroy at one's will. Then nothing more. It perishes, it is finished. 26th June. Why then is it a crime to kill? Yes, why? On the contrary, it is the law of nature. The mission of every being is to kill. He kills to live, and he kills to kill. The beast kills without ceasing all day, every instant of his existence. Man kills without ceasing to nourish himself. But since he needs, besides, to kill for pleasure, he has invented hunting. The child kills the insects he finds, the little birds, all the little animals that come in his way. But this does not suffice for the irresistible need to massacre that is in us. It is not enough to kill beasts. We must kill man too. Long ago, this need was satisfied by human sacrifices. Now the requirements of social life have made murder a crime. We condemn and punish the assassin. But as we cannot live without yielding to this natural and imperious instinct of death, we relieve ourselves from time to time by wars. Then a whole nation slaughters another nation. It is a feast of blood, a feast that maddens armies and that intoxicates civilians, women, and children who read by lamplight at night the feverish story of massacre. One might suppose that those destined to accomplish these butcheries of men would be despised. No, they are loaded with honors. They are clad in gold and in resplendent garments. They wear plumes on their heads and ornaments on their breasts, and they are given crosses, rewards, titles of every kind. They are proud, respected, loved by women, cheered by the crowd, solely because their mission is to shed human blood. They drag through the streets their instruments of death, that the passer-by, clad in black, looks on with envy. For to kill is the great law set by nature in the heart of existence. There is nothing more beautiful and honorable than killing. 30th June. To kill is the law, because nature loves eternal youth. She seems to cry in all her unconscious acts, quick, quick, quick. The more she destroys, the more she renews herself. 2nd July. A human being. What is a human being? Through thought, it is a reflection of all that is. Through memory and science, it is an abridged edition of the universe whose history it represents, a mirror of things and of nations. Each human being becomes a microcosm in the macrocosm. 3rd July. It must be a pleasure, unique and full of zest, to kill, to have there before one the living, thinking being, to make therein a little hole, nothing but a little hole, to see that red thing flow which is the blood which makes life, and to have before one only a heap of limp flesh, cold, inert, void of thought. 5th August. I, who have passed my life in judging, condemning, killing by the spoken word, killing by the guillotine those who had killed by the knife. If I should do as all the assassins have done whom I have smitten, who would know it? 10th August. Who would ever know? Who would ever suspect me? Especially if I should choose a being I had no interest in doing away with. 15th August. The temptation has come to me. It pervades my whole being. My hands tremble with the desire to kill. 22nd August. I could resist no longer. I killed the little creature as an experiment, for a beginning. Jean, my servant, had a goldfinch in a cage hung in the office window. I sent him on an errand, and I took the little bird in my hand, where I felt its heart beat. It was warm. I went up to my room. From time to time, I squeezed it tighter. Its heart beat faster. This was atrocious and delicious. I was near choking it, but I could not see the blood. Then I took scissors, short nail scissors, and I cut its throat with 3 slits, quite gently. It opened its bill. It struggled to escape me, but I held it. Oh, I held it. I could have held a mad dog, and I saw the blood trickle. And then I did as assassins do, real ones. I washed the scissors. I washed my hands. I sprinkled water and took the body, the corpse, to the garden to hide it. I buried it under a strawberry plant. It will never be found. Every day I shall eat a strawberry from that plant. How one can enjoy life when one knows how! My servant cried. He thought his bird flown. How could he suspect me? 25th August. I must kill a man. I must. 30th August. It is done. But what a little thing. I had gone for a walk in the forest of Vernez. I was thinking of nothing, literally nothing. A child was in the road. A little child eating a slice of bread and butter. He stops to see me pass and he says, "Good day, Mr. President." And the thought enters my head. Shall I kill him? I answer, "You are alone, my boy?" "Yes, sir." "All alone in the wood?" "Yes, sir." The wish to kill him intoxicated me like wine. I approached him quite softly, persuaded that he was going to run away. And suddenly, I seized him by the throat. He looked at me with terror in his eyes. Such eyes! He held my wrists in his little hands, and his body writhed like a feather over fire. Then he moved no more. I threw the body in the ditch and some weeds on top of it. I returned home and dined well. What a little thing it was. In the evening I was very gay, light, rejuvenated. I passed the evening at the prefect's. They found me witty, but I have not seen blood. I am tranquil. 31st August. The body has been discovered. They are hunting for the assassin. 1st September. 2 tramps have been arrested. Proofs are lacking. 2nd September. The parents have been to see me. They wept. 6th October. Nothing has been discovered. Some strolling vagabond must have done the deed. If I had seen the blood flow, it seems to me I should be tranquil now. The desire to kill is in my blood. It is like the passion of youth at 20. 20th October. Yet another. I was walking by the river after breakfast, and I saw, under a willow, a fisherman asleep. It was noon. A spade was standing in a potato field nearby, as if expressly for me. I took it. I returned. I raised it like a club, and with one blow of the edge I cleft the fisherman's head. Oh, he bled, this one. Rose-colored blood. It flowed into the water quite gently, and I went away with the grave step. If I had been seen, I should have made an excellent assassin. 25th October. The affair of the fisherman makes a great stir. His nephew, who fished with him, is charged with the murder. 26th October. The examining magistrate affirms that the nephew is guilty. Everybody in town believes it. 27th October. The nephew makes a very poor witness. He had gone to the village to buy bread and cheese, he declared. He swore that his uncle had been killed in his absence. Who would believe him? 28th October. The nephew has all but confessed. They have battered him so. Justice! 15th November. There are overwhelming proofs against the nephew, who was his uncle's heir. I shall preside at the sessions. 25th January. To death, to death, to death! I have had him condemned to death! The Advocate General spoke like an angel! Yet another. I shall go to see him executed. 10th March. It is done. They guillotined him this morning. He died very well, very well. That gave me pleasure. How fine it is to see a man's head cut off! Now, I shall wait. I can wait. It would take such a little thing to let myself be caught.
The manuscript contained yet other pages, but without relating any new crime. Alienist physicians to whom the awful story has been submitted declare that there are in this world many undiscovered madmen as adroit and as much to be feared as this monstrous lunatic.
Shorty Small, a man neither short nor small, sat with his back against a wall in a dingy bar several blocks off Bourbon Street. He concentrated on the front door and sipped on a half-consumed bottle of Nola Blonde Ale. The din of Mardi Gras could be heard in the distance outside the establishment. The comings and goings of revelers kept the door he watched constantly opening and closing. Finally, at 10 minutes past 11 p.m., Homer LaCroix rushed through the entrance. 6'5", real thin, hawk nose, and long curly salt and pepper hair, the man scanned the occupants of the room. His eyes settled on Small, and he made a beeline toward the table. Small growled, "You're late." The lanky man shrugged. "So what was such an emergency? You dragged me all the way from Chicago to New Orleans." "Got a job for you, shorty." "What kind of job?" He fished an object out of his jeans and placed it on the table. Small stared at the item and then locked eyes with the man. "What the?" "It's a silver bullet." "I can see that. Like I told you on the phone, I don't do that anymore." "I know what you said, but for $50K, I figured you'd at least think about it." Small's attention bounced from Homer to the bullet and then back at the tall man. $50K, huh?" "Yeah, $50K. "Damn." He picked up the silver bullet and studied it closer. "At one time, you were the best hatchet man in the business." The comment went ignored as Small continued to examine the bullet. Finally, he said, "I'm not saying I will, but what do I have to do for $50K?" Homer pointed toward the object. "Use that?" "I know that, asshole. Who's the mark?" "A witch." With a slow shake of his head, Small stood. "I ain't getting mixed up with that kind of nonsense, Homer. Thanks for wasting my time." "Hear me out. Isn't that what you think?" The former hitman hesitated. With a long glare at his old acquaintance, he returned to his seat. 10 minutes, then I'm out of here." Homer leaned over the table and whispered, "Voodoo in New Orleans is big business. It draws more tourists than Mardi Gras. Plus, it keeps those famous fancy restaurants from going bankrupt." "You're down to 9 minutes. Do you know much about voodoo and witches?" A shake of Small's shaggy head was the answer. "Voodoo is basically a religion brought over during the slave trade from South Africa. Those enslaved persons brought their culture from Bambara, which is now Mali, and the Kingdom of Congo, roughly where Angola is today." "Your point, Homer?" "Bear with me, shorty. These slaves were brought over to the French colony of Louisiana. This all started in the early 18th century. The white settlers of French Louisiana were heavily Roman Catholic. During this time, the area transitioned from French to Spanish control, back to France, and then after the Louisiana Purchase, the United States. During all these changes, the two religions syncretized." Small frowned. "Huh?" "Syncretized. It means the two religions attempted to reconcile and combine with each other." "Okay." "The melting pot of Louisiana transformed the African traditions into what is now known as Louisiana Voodoo. Most people think of it as a religion practiced in secret." "I thought voodoo was about sticking a pin in a doll." LaCroix smiled. "One of the myths of the religion. However, ancestors and spirit guides are essential paths of voodoo, as are spells and incantations. Voodoo queens are female religious leaders who offer guidance to believers with problems and sickness using charms, herbs, and prayers. They use ritualistic dances, songs, incantations, and beseech ancestors to ease the practitioner's particular affliction. No one has ever told me this, but I think that's why people started calling the voodoo queens witches." "Homer, this is all fascinating, but you're down to 4 minutes to sell me on this cockamamie story of yours." "Shorty, my whole point boils down to this. Voodoo tourism is big business here in New Orleans. Millions of tourist dollars flow into the city coffers. Someone is trying to screw up the fun nature of voodoo by scaring potential tourists away." Small tilted his head. "Okay, I just added a few minutes to your timetable. There's money involved." "Big money, Shorty. He paused and smiled. Those are the so-called keepers of the faith are scared. Why? They believe a real witch is seeking revenge on the ancestors of those who persecuted her in the mid-20th century. You're kidding. No, that's why they gave me a silver bullet to be used. It's the only thing that'll kill a real witch and cleanse the earth of her presence. Rolling his eyes, the big man shook his head. Homer, someone is pulling your leg. There's no such thing as a real witch. There might be a few poor wretched souls who believe they are witches, but they're not. LaCroix leaned over the table. Who cares if the witch is real? Our employer believes she is, and is willing to pay someone $50,000 to use this silver bullet to make it go away. That someone can be you. What's your cut? I do this out of the goodness of my heart. Bullshit. Your heart is as black as mine. I'm being paid as a consultant. It's separate from the $50,000. Do they know where the witch is? No. With a chuckle, Small sat back in his chair and drained his beer. Then, how do they know it's a witch? Reaching into his pocket, LaCroix pulled out what looked to be a folded playing card. He opened and laid it on the table. This is one of the 5 tarot cards found on the desks of each member of the tourism board. No one knows how they got there, and security cameras show they suddenly appeared around midnight. Small picked up the object and studied it. A tower with lightning striking it and 2 dudes falling. So? The tower is one of the more foreboding cards in the tarot deck. It means there will be upheaval or change coming. Rolling his eyes again, Small handed the card back to LaCroix. I can't believe people fall for this crap, especially enough to spend $50,000 to stop it. You would if you knew how much money the haunted house tours brings in. That's not the only card they've received. Everyone on the tourism board has also received a death card in the mail. They think it symbolizes the end of the tourist trade. They are quite literally pissing their pants. This seems to be something the police would need to investigate. One would think so, but the police told them until some crime is actually committed, they aren't interested. Which brings us to the need for someone else to take care of the problem. Thus, the $50,000 and you. Small studied the bullet again, then the tarot card. I'll need more than 1 bullet. LaCroix nodded. When Shorty Small exited his hotel early the next morning, he planned to walk the streets of the French Quarter and get a feel for the area. His journey took him to Toulouse Street, where he turned left. At the intersection with Bourbon Street, he made a right. This early in the morning, he saw street cleaners hosing off the puke left behind by the previous evening's Mardi Gras participants, along with food and drink suppliers delivering product to the restaurants and bars scattered along the famous street. Making another right at Phillip Street, he looked back and noticed a woman a block behind him staring intently in his direction. Over the course of his career, as a man who handled personnel problems with a gun, his radar pinged when he saw her. Quickening his pace, he ducked into an open coffee shop. He waited for the woman to pass, but after 10 minutes, he still had not seen her. Silently chastising himself for his runaway paranoia, he ordered a coffee to go and continued his tour of the French Quarter. Turning right on Chartres Street, he reached Jackson Square and sat across from St. Louis Cathedral on a park bench. He planned to enjoy his coffee and watch the pedestrian traffic mill about. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the woman who followed him on Bourbon Street. He paid no obvious attention to her, but kept her in his peripheral vision. She remained still while he pretended to study the men, women, and children roaming the area. The distance to her location at the corner of Chartres Street and St. Anne would prevent him from catching up to her. She would have plenty of time to disappear into any local business and elude him. Standing, he found a trash receptacle to deposit his now empty coffee cup. When he looked toward the position where she last stood, the space was empty. With a frown, he jogged toward the corner and glanced up and down St. Anne Street. He saw her a block to the northwest. As he started to follow, she disappeared. He stopped, stood without moving for a few moments, and then hurried to where he last saw her. When he arrived, There were no doors, alleys, or alcoves. She had simply vanished. Turning back to return to the park bench, a black cat scurried across the street in front of him. LaCroix chuckled as Small retold the events of his morning tour in the French Quarter. I told you she was a witch. Witches do not exist, Homer. The thin man pushed a box of 9mm ammunition across the table. You asked for more silver bullets. There are 25 in there, with the remaining one's hollow point. Small put his hand on the box and slipped it under the table. Thanks. They do exist. The one spying on you may be the one causing all the trouble. Be careful out there, Shorty. We'll see if I see her tomorrow. He paused. Anything happened yesterday I should know about? A slow nod from LaCroix. They aren't sure it's related, but one of the board members of the tourism board died of a heart attack last night. Let me guess. He was seen with a woman beforehand. How'd you guess? I was joking. What'd this woman look like? Blonde, mid-40s, average height, and I'm told a real looker. Small stared at LaCroix for over 30 seconds. That's how I would describe the woman who followed me yesterday. Well, there you go, Shorty. I'd load your gun with the silver bullets immediately. Okay, I'll take the job. Did you tell them I get half up front? I did. Where is it? A plain white business envelope appeared on the table. There's 30K in there. With the death of McAllister, they upped the fee to 60. The envelope disappeared just like the box of ammo. Small narrowed his eyes. How'd you know I'd take this job? LaCroix shrugged. After seeing the look in your eyes the other day, I figured you'd take the job. He stood. If I were you, I'd brush up on the history of the French Quarter. It might keep you alive. With those words, he walked out of the bar. Small muttered to himself, way ahead of you on that one, Homer. Located on the southern edge of the French Quarter on Decatur Street, Small's hotel ranked high on the list of best hotels in New Orleans. Close to restaurants and all the cultural offerings of this section of town, it lay only a block from a jewelry, gemstones, and minerals shop that also offered psychic readings. During his walking trip on the first day, he wandered into the shop and struck up a conversation with the owner. She turned out to be not only knowledgeable on local history, but up to date on all the happenings within the local religious community, mainly voodoo. After his meeting with LaCroix, he waited around until 8 p.m. when the small shop closed. Madame Claire Honoré greeted him as he walked into the store. Ah, Monsieur Small, I am so happy you are here. I have one customer left, and then we can talk. She hurried away while Shorty examined a display case with numerous gemstones. He heard the little bell above the door jingle, and then she returned. I did not know if you would keep our appointment. I have lots of questions, Madame Honoré. Please call me Claire. He folded his arms and appraised the woman. She appeared to be in her mid to late 40s, long brown hair with a silver streak prominent on one side, hazel eyes, and a smile he found inviting. I'm Shorty. She looked him up and down. You are most definitely not short. He shrugged. It's my name. Taking his arm, she guided him to a room in the back. This is where we do our psychic readings. We use tarot cards or read palms. He glanced at her. Do you believe in that sort of stuff? Offering the sly smile he enjoyed, she grinned. I don't have to believe. I just have to sell it. He chuckled. Tell me about witches. What kind? The Chamber of Commerce kind? The New Orleans kind? Or the ones no one should mess with kind? Small tilted his head. Let's start with the kind no one should mess with. That could take a while. You buying me dinner? He pointed to a ring on her left hand. What about your husband? She patted his arm as she guided him toward the store's front door. He's been gone for 10 years. I used the ring to keep the vultures away. Then I'm buying dinner. Know a good place? At breakfast the next morning in the hotel cafe, Claire Honoré finally got around to explaining more about New Orleans and witches. Shorty, This lovely city has a long history of voodoo, witches, the occult, and various other traditions passed down from the past inhabitants of the area. Most of it is harmless and helps support the local economy. That's what I've been told. She held her coffee cup with both hands. However, there is a dark side. He remained quiet as he kept his gaze on her. She continued, Most witches are benevolent. Some truly believe they are witches, while others are hustlers and scam artists. After another sip of coffee, she looked up at him. The real witches are agents of the devil and will steal your soul. It is said they can take the shape of anything or any person. How do you tell if a witch has taken a new shape? Will it cackle like the ones in The Wizard of Oz? The sly smile returned as Claire shook her head. No, it is their eyes. The eyes will be a black pool, bottomless and enticing. It is the eyes that suck the soul from her victim's body. Are there any real witches here in New Orleans? There have been many over the years, not so much recently, but now. What does that mean? I am hearing rumors one has returned to seek vengeance on those that make a mockery of the ancient traditions. Do you believe it? She sipped her coffee and then studied the contents. It is inevitable. We have strayed from the real purpose of voodoo. It came about in this area to ease the burdens of the early slaves who toiled to make their masters rich. Now, those traditions have once again morphed into a system that exploits the workers and favors only a few rich men. So you think she has returned to do good? Claire shrugged. It depends on your definition of good. She paused. But no, I don't believe she has returned to do anything positive. I feel she has arrived to threaten the livelihood of those who make their living here in the French Quarter. Does that include you? She sipped her coffee and then nodded. What can stop her? With a chuckle, the store owner said, 2 things, fire or a silver bullet through her black heart. Another sip of coffee, she stared at Small. Why are you so interested? I'm curious, that's all. Shorty Small, somehow I doubt that. I saw your poem last night. You are here for a specific reason. Yes. But you will not tell me. Not right now. Someday, maybe. After Claire Honoré returned to her apartment above the store to freshen up before she opened the shop at 11 a.m., Small returned to his room in the hotel. His doubts about a real witch returning to New Orleans seeking revenge remained in place. However, after listening to Claire at dinner last night, and then again during breakfast, he retrieved the box of ammunition given to him by LaCroix and loaded a magazine with silver bullets. As he pressed the shiny objects into the black metal sleeve, he mumbled to himself, Better to be prepared. Once he completed this chore, he returned the weapon to the inside the pants holster at his waist. At exactly noon, he walked northeast on Decatur Street until he arrived at Jackson Square. Taking the same park bench where he sat 2 days earlier, he watched the pedestrians and waited. Time passed slowly, but 40 minutes later, a tall, lanky man sat at the opposite end of the bench and said, Any luck finding her? No. Have you tried? I know more today than I did yesterday. And that means? I'm working on it, asshole. You haven't exactly been a fountain of information. More tarot cards were found stuck to doors this morning. Which cards? Mostly the Tower card, 1 death card. Who got that one? It was on the mausoleum where the voodoo queen Marie Laveau is buried. Sounds like the card's a little late. Funny, Shorty. The problem is the cemetery is closed to the public due to all the years of vandalism. The only way to access the gravesite is during an official tour with a licensed tour guide. Okay, they slipped in after dark. LaCroix shook his head. Motion detectors and security cameras protect the property at night. The card was found this morning by a maintenance man. Just like the cards appearing on the desks, nothing showed up on the security cameras. So, what does the death card on a grave mean? I'm no expert, but I'm told it means a life-altering change is coming. Small laughed. To a grave? No, the person who spoke to me believes this is a sign the future of the French Quarter is in jeopardy. They want you to hurry and fulfill your assignment. Standing, the hitman looked down at his bench companion. I'll check out the cemetery. In the meantime, tell your bosses I make the schedule when the job is completed. No one else. If they push me, the contract will be null and void. Down payment is non-refundable. But you knew that, didn't you, Homer? A nod was his answer. The guided tour of the St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, where the mausoleum of Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau resided, lasted an hour, concluding at 5:30 in the afternoon. Small paid little attention to the tour guide as he used the time to locate the security cameras throughout the grounds. As an expert in avoiding such devices, he concluded no one would be able to get near Marie Laveau's final resting place without being seen by no less than 4 cameras. With a growing realization he might be in over his head on this assignment, he walked back toward his hotel, making a stop at Claire Honoret's gem store. When he approached the small shop, the front door stood ajar. Looking in, he saw nothing but chaos, smashed display cases, overturned shelving units, and broken glass mixed with necklaces and bracelets covering the floor. Small yelled, "Claire!" When he received no answer, he yelled it again. He heard a faint voice say, "In the back! Watch out for broken glass!" Making his way toward the rear portion of the store, he found the proprietor in the room where psychic readings took place. Zip ties held her legs and wrists to a captain's chair. She looked up at him. "It's a mess out there, isn't it?" Hurrying to her, he used a pocket knife to cut her bindings. She stood and hugged him. "Thanks. You're the first person to come by since this happened." Who? Never seen her before. Blonde, mid-40s, average height, and very pretty. I didn't hear the bell on the door. It tells me when someone enters the shop. I was redoing a display. When I turned, there she stood next to me. She scared me, Shorty. Her? The one we talked about this morning. The eyes, they were black as coal and her breath smelled of sulfur. What did she say? She didn't. She swept her arms around in the air, and all the damage you see out there occurred. She pushed me into this room, and that's all I remember until I heard you calling my name. Where's your front door key? She pulled a set out of her jeans pockets and handed it to him. When he returned, he said, "You need to call the police." She shook her head. "Won't do any good. They won't believe me." "Just tell them a bunch of druggies broke in and did it. That way the insurance company will have a police report to work with." She tilted her head to the side. "I'm impressed, Mr. Small. Are you a former cop?" "No, but I've dealt with the police before. They'll buy the story about a break-in." Claire folded her arms. "She knows I spoke to you last night." "Who knows?" "The witch you're chasing." "Hard to chase someone you've never seen." "Figure of speech, Shorty." "I know. You sure she just waved her arms?" "Positive." Small looked at all the damage. "Call the police. I'll stick around and make sure they take you seriously." After the police finished taking pictures and asking questions, they left, and Small escorted Claire up the back staircase to her apartment. Nothing seemed out of place. He said, "Make sure nothing is missing." She glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "Make sure she didn't come up here and take something personal." "Like what?" "I don't know, a hairbrush or something like that." With a frown, Claire walked toward a closed door and entered the room. She reemerged holding a brown object. "Here's my brush." "Good. Look for anything you've used personally." She tapped her foot. "Are you telling me you believe she's a witch?" "I'm not saying anything. Just look for something personal missing." She went through another door into what Small could see contained a bed. 10 minutes later, she emerged, her eyes wide. "Shorty, your t-shirt I wore home last night is missing." The stillness on the streets of the French Quarter seemed out of place as Small returned to his hotel room just before dawn the next morning. When he entered his room, he half expected it to be trashed like Claire's small store. However, nothing seemed out of place. After placing a Do Not Disturb sign on his hotel room doorknob, he stripped and took a long hot shower. Emerging minutes later, a towel wrapped around his waist, he stopped suddenly at the sight of a blonde woman standing in the middle of his hotel room. Her eyes appraised him. "Monsieur Small, why do you seek me out?" "You've caught me at a disadvantage. I don't know your name." "Because I did not give it to you." Her accent was French, the voice slightly hoarse. "Now, why do you seek me out?" "I've been offered a contract to find you." "And kill me?" He shrugged. "I haven't yet, have I?" "No." She tilted her head and walked toward the door. "You have no idea of what you are involved with." "Care to enlighten me?" Her hand touched the doorknob and she turned to look at him. "No, you need to discover it yourself. What you find could shake the very foundation of who you believe yourself to be." With a smile, she dissolved into a blue mist. It rose and disappeared into the air vent above the door. The tightness in his stomach caused him to hurry to the closet. He checked his Glock 19. It remained where he left it before his shower. Taking the weapon from the holster, he ejected the magazine and checked the number of rounds. None were missing. He carried it back to the bathroom. "Who the hell sent you to hire me, Homer?" LaCroix raised his hands, palms toward the man sitting across from him. "Easy, shorty. What happened?" "A blonde bitch with black eyes is what happened." Raising his eyebrows, the skinny man lowered his hands. "You saw her?" "In the middle of my hotel room. She was there, then she wasn't." "What do you mean?" "She was there, then oof, she wasn't." "Did she call you by name?" "Yes. Dumb." "Who is she?" Closing his eyes, LaCroix scowled. "She knows why you're here." "Obviously." He folded his arms. "When she disappeared on the street the other day, did you see anything strange?" "No, just a black cat." "Oh dear. What the hell does that mean?" "Not a good sign." "I'll be leaving today. I told you I was done with the business. You've successfully convinced me I should have stayed retired." "You can't." "I can." "They'll want their money back." "Like I told you, Homer, no refunds. Besides, I have expenses." LaCroix examined the hitman. "Did she scare you?" Small stared at the thin man. "Scare? No. Convince me you haven't been telling me the truth? Yes." "They'll send someone to collect." "LaCroix, you haven't been listening, have you? No refunds." "The next messenger won't be as easy to get along with." "I can be the same way, remember?" The thin man nodded. "They don't like people who fail at assignments." "What's that mean?" "Probably the last time you'll see me." "Good, I didn't want to see you this time." "No, I mean, I'll be taken into the swamp and fed to the gators. No one will find a body." Small rolled his eyes. "Really, Homer? You're giving me a sob story?" "It's not a sob story. It's a fact and it will happen." Small took a calming breath. "Well, we can't have that." He narrowed his eyes. "Don't you think it's time you told me the truth?" "I did." He paused for a second. "I might have left out a few details, but people who hired me are really scared about the appearance of a new witch." "What'd you leave out?" Taking a deep breath, LaCroix let it out slowly. "It has to do with money." "It always does." "Yeah, but I'm talking millions of dollars." Small glared at his friend. "The powers that be like the way the current system works. The tourist industry generates revenue for the area, and each of the businesses within the French Quarter pays their fair share to the tourist board." "Voluntarily, or is there an enforcement squad?" The latter." "Thought so. and some of the local businesses don't like it. With a nod, LaCroix continued. The tourism board got greedy and raised a percentage businesses have to pay a year ago. A lot of the business owners banded together and found a way to fight it. A witch? Yeah, they used black magic and conjured up a witch. Small laughed out loud and shook his head. You don't need me, Homer. All of you need a trip to the psych ward. You're all crazy. That's why they had the silver bullets made. You've seen her disappear. You know she's real. I don't know how she did it, but it's not black magic. There's no such thing. The thin man shrugged. Others think different. I'll prove it by finding her. I'll prove she's a fake and you guys can pay me the rest of the money. They just want her gone. After his meeting with LaCroix, Small stopped by Claire's shop to see if she needed any help cleaning up the small store. When he arrived, he saw the sign indicating the shop would be closed for remodeling. He tried the doorknob and found it open. Stepping in, he discovered the shop in the same state of chaos as the night before. Claire? He waited. No response. Stepping in, he called her name again. Claire? Still silence. He climbed the stairs in the back toward the apartment and knocked on the door. No response. Taking a slim tool out of his billfold, he unlocked the door and stepped in. Claire, it's Shorty. Silence. With his concern growing, he took the stairs back down 2 at a time and hurried to the seance room. Empty. He turned toward the front door and saw the blonde woman. He said, What have you done with Claire? She's gone. I can see that. Where? Away. Small withdrew the Glock from his concealed holster and pointed it at the specter. I don't know who you are and quite frankly don't care. I do care about Claire. Now where is she? The woman fixed her coal black eyes on Small. She's where you'll never find her. My patience has limits, lady. You shoot me with a silver bullet and you'll never find her. Sounds like we have a stalemate. Yes. You first. Leave New Orleans and Madame Honoré will be free. I have a counter-proposal for you. Let her go and I won't shoot you. The response from the blonde woman surprised Small. She cackled like a witch from a Hollywood movie. He shook his head and leveled the gun at her heart. Was that supposed to scare me? She frowned and backed up toward the front door. Slowly, at first, she quickened her pace and said, The one you seek is unconscious and weak. Find her you must, before the end of dusk. Just as she reached it, the door opened by itself. Emitting another cackle, she stepped onto the sidewalk and vanished. Damn! Small ran to the still open door and stepped outside the shop. He looked up and down Charta Street. The woman was nowhere to be seen. He turned to look at the building and noticed another floor above Claire's apartment. Dashing back into the shop, he took the stairs 2 at a time to her apartment. Inside, he hurried from one room to the next. When he entered the kitchen, he noticed a door on the far side of the room. Claire was indeed unconscious and unresponsive. The paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, and within seconds, the siren spooled up as it accelerated south toward Decatur Street. He turned to a police officer who had responded along with the ambulance to his 911 call and asked, Where are they taking her? University Medical Center. It's over on Canal Street. Small nodded. The officer looked around the shop. You were here yesterday, weren't you? Yes. Want to tell me why you're here again? I came by to see if she needed help cleaning up. Doesn't look like she got much done. When did you last see her? Small turned his attention to the policeman. When I left? The officer's hand slowly moved toward his service weapon. Noting the cop moving his hand, Small said, After you guys left last night, I made sure she was okay before leaving. I made her some tea and stayed with her until she fell asleep. It was somewhere around 4 a.m. His hand returned to a neutral position. You from around here? No, I'm here on business. Want to tell me more about this blonde woman you mentioned? Small debated with himself about how much to tell the officer. Finally, he said, "Not much to tell. When I first got here, the place was empty. I went up and checked Claire's apartment. I didn't know about the 3rd floor at that time. When I came back down, she was standing in the middle of the shop." "Did she tell you where Ms. Honoré was?" "Yes." "So you think she's the one who assaulted her?" "Yes." The officer nodded. "Where are you staying?" He gave the cop his hotel's address and told him where he lived in Chicago. After the man left, he locked the front door to the shop and started walking toward the hospital. Small stood at the side of Claire's hospital bed and looked down at her. She glanced up and said, "What's happened, Shorty?" "I was hoping you could tell me, Claire." "All I remember is I slept until noon. After a few cups of coffee, I went down to the shop and placed a sign on the front door about being closed for a few days. Then I woke up here." She paused for a moment. "They told me if I hadn't been found, I probably wouldn't have made it." He frowned. "Did they say why?" "No, just that I had a weak pulse and low blood oxygen." She reached for his hand and held it. "A nurse told me a friend found me. That friend was you, wasn't it?" He nodded. "Thank you. I was on the 3rd floor, wasn't I?" "Yes." "I have rarely ventured up there. Too dark and spooky." "What's this witch got against you, Claire?" "I have no idea." Small crossed his arms. "They're going to let you go home here soon. Why don't you stay with me at the hotel tonight? I can look around the shop tomorrow and see if I can find any clues who this blonde woman might be." She squeezed his hand. "I like that idea." Using a flashlight purchased before he ventured up to the 3rd floor, Small swept the beam around the cluttered area. Claire followed him into the room. "I've never really been up here much, Shorty. The wiring is messed up, which means no lights. Since I don't need the room, I've never made the repairs." He looked at her and frowned. "You own the building?" "Yeah." She paused. "Actually, I inherited it from my grandmother. She was the one who started the gem shop. I worked there until she died. I moved in and took over the shop." "Do you know the history of the building?" She shook her head. He turned his attention back to the contents of the 3rd floor. He moved further into the darkness, and his flashlight shone on a brick wall. "Is there a room behind this wall, Claire?" "I have no idea." He detected a strained tone to her voice. Turning, he pointed the flashlight back at her and found she stood with her arms folded, shivering. "You cold?" "All of a sudden, I'm freezing." He walked back to stand beside her. A distant cold air pocket hung over the area. He heard a loud noise behind him. Pointing the flashlight toward the sound, he watched a door open in the wall. A figure emerged with a brilliant halo surrounding it. Claire screamed, and Shorty Small did what Shorty Small did best. He retrieved the Glock from his concealed holster, pointed it at the figure, and started squeezing the trigger. Homer LaCroix handed the envelope with the additional $30,000 to Shorty Small. "The powers that be are very pleased with the outcome, my friend." "Good. I like satisfied clients." He tilted his head. "You in good standing with them?" "Extremely. They like your style and asked me to see if you would move to New Orleans. They have, possible other projects for you. Your moving expenses would be picked up, of course." "Really? Let me think about it. I bet Claire would like for you to move." "She would." "Then what do you say?" "I'll think about it." "She doing okay?" "Yes, thanks for asking." "When did you figure out the witch lived on the 3rd floor of her building?" "The first time I saw the place, I didn't notice the 3rd floor, almost like it didn't exist. The night I found Claire, I stood outside and noticed there was another floor above her apartment. I honestly don't remember seeing it before. I found the staircase to it behind a door in her kitchen." "How many did you find?" "The blonde bitch with the black eyes was there. Not sure how many others. As soon as I shot her, she shrieked and dissolved into a puddle of water. The others disappeared." "What happened to the water?" Small gave LaCroix a half smile. "Sopped it up with a towel, then burned it." Does Claire know anything? Nah, she passed out when the door opened. She inherited the building from her grandmother, who I discovered after a trip to the library was a well-known voodoo queen before the turn of the century. I also found a picture of the woman in a digital copy of a newspaper. Oh, yeah, blonde and a pretty woman. Are you telling me? Yeah, the witch was Claire's grandmother. Claire doesn't know that, so keep your mouth shut. Why? Think about it. Would you want to know your grandmother tried to kill you? LaCroix smiled and nodded. He tilted his head. There's always something going on around here that needs someone with your talent. Why don't you say goodbye to Chicago and join us down here? The big man was quiet for a few moments. He pursed his lips. Yeah, Chicago doesn't hold that many good memories for me. Guess if a hurricane comes, I can always head north.
Titties! The dam finally broke. Titties! Echoed the mouths of nearly 100 broken-toothed and missing-toothed, bewhiskered shipyard workers. It always started with one man. Then everyone in the shantytown tavern would raise their mug or hat or soup can, or whatever they were drinking out of, and echo the sentiment, and that's when the Titties song began. Titties, titties, titties! Titties, titties, titties! It was a song where the lyrics didn't progress much further than the title. No melody. 3 beats on, 1 beat off per measure. All it meant was that someone in the group had reached the edge of his limit first, and now he was obligated to spot several others with his own allotment of rum or whiskey. They would stomp their feet and rap their fists until they were too tired, or something else distracted them. You might have guessed that there was a shortage of women in this environment. You'd be right. No woman in their right mind, or with any shred of awareness for her safety, would have lived in our little shantytown, affectionately referred to as Perdition Ridge. It was barely safe enough for children, like me. Our little ramshackle huts of cinder blocks, corrugated tin, and wooden pallets lined the shore like the barnacles on the ships. More often than not, we were walled in by a skybox of fog that made our little place feel infinite and isolated, cordoned off in its own little netherworld. Things were fairly predictable after the Titties song burst out. With someone else doling out the precious supply of liquor, others got careless about hitting their own limits. Then, whoever didn't pass out would go home to their own nests of rubbish. My old man never quite blacked out. He always managed to drag himself home to me, where I pretended to be asleep. All too often he would step on me, and I would do my best not to cry out. He'd slur the Titties song a couple of times in defiance of the others, and, I'm sure, out of a measure of longing to go back home. I mean, home. I didn't remember much about our real home. I remembered that it was warm, lights were brighter. It wasn't damp and miserable, and I wasn't always getting sick. I kind of remembered Mother. When she talked to me, her voice was soft and soothing. Not so much when she talked to Father. I barely remember the beach that she would walk along. She would take me with her. Her and Father yelled at each other a lot, so we ended up on the beach more often. It had this pale sand that was almost white and soft enough to sleep on. That's all I've got. I didn't remember hearing her say that she loved me and that we would see each other again someday, but I tried to convince myself that she had, and I just forgot. The only thing that I had left of her was a small drawstring bag full of that pale sand. I kept it inside of a small lockbox I found on the shore. which in turn I kept under a couple of loose floorboards. It was the only way to keep them safe from Father. It was the only way to keep anything safe from Father. Once in a while, I could get Father to talk to me. It wasn't often, so I would bullet him with as many questions as he could handle before he got annoyed. Where was Mommy? When could we go see her? Why did everyone but him wear just one glove? How did we get here? The only question he would ever answer with any clarity was, how did we get here? Everyone in town had been invited by the fisherman. That's how he had introduced himself. He never gave a proper name. He just showed up one day shortly after Mommy had given birth to me. A strange character that wore a wide-brimmed hat studded with hooks and a long, flowing raincoat that was more like a robe than anything else. He carried a long walking stick carved from rotten driftwood that curled up, and above his head where a small glass lantern hung. He showed up asking for Father by name, asked him how things were going for him and his nice young family. Father explained that things weren't going very well at all, which seemed to be what the fisherman had been expecting to hear. So he proceeded to explain that he oversaw a great maritime operation on the shore of the sea, where men could make a good living in a short amount of time. The catch was that it would require Father to relocate. He would have to live on site and be willing to work long hours. But business was good, so pay was high, and it would only be a few months before Father would be able to move back home and live off of his earnings. If he turned out to be a good worker, they could make a regular arrangement of him working for a few months and then spending the rest of the year at home with his family full-time. My father was little more than a backbone and a set of thumbs. He eschewed work, and he loved to drink. The prospect of high returns for relatively low effort drew him in. Mother wasn't for it. She said that the fisherman was like his long-lost twin brother or something, full of fine promises that each ended in a noose. It turned into one of the worst fights they had ever had. And then, there we were, in Perdition Ridge. Father never explained why I wasn't left with Mother, and he got mad if I tried to pry. She just wouldn't have been able to take care of you, was the best he could do. It didn't really matter how young you were. If you lived in Perdition Ridge, you had a job. My job was to set the cages, to try to trap crabs, crayfish, or any other unlucky animal for our dinner. The jetties were bristled with traps like ours. Some weighted, some buoyed. Cages with meals that carried a price that the intended prey could not comprehend. It was the only reason I was ever allowed out on the jetties in the first place. I wasn't to be out on them unless I was setting our cages or drawing them up. I enjoyed it enough because it gave me something to do that Father wouldn't punish me for. But most of all, I wanted to catch a glimpse of Father at work. I wanted to be there when one of the ships passed close by, and there he would be, and I would wave at him and feel proud, and he would do the same. That never happened, but I kept hoping that it would. Setting the cages was fairly easy. You load a mesh bag with salted herring or haddock, place it inside the cage, drop it down, and just wait. It was another ordinary day when I was setting the bait that I really started to pay attention to what I was doing. The cage was nothing to the bait. If it had still been alive, they could swim free, no problem. The mesh bag was their cage. Whichever lobster or crab would come along would be ripping the bag open to feed on the bait. No obstacle to them. But they would be caught by the cage, heedless of the bigger picture. It's a cage only if it can trap you, I mused. You could be inside one, but still free to go if it wasn't made for you. I thought about the many things I'd caught in those traps. I'd pull them up, and they looked like they hadn't understood they were in a cage until it was too late. Then I thought of my father and the look he'd get in his eyes right before he'd set to drinking. A grown man that could go anywhere or do whatever he wanted, but he looked like his body was his own prison, like his skin was a cage for his soul. The sharp sound of a bell broke my thoughts. One of the ships had snuck up on me. It was passing by in a wide arc. I wasn't used to that. It looked like it was going to come close enough for me to touch it. I hoped that would be my chance to see my father at work, and my heart rose. But it hovered in confusion. The ship emerging out of the pale wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It was monstrous, bigger than anything. It seemed to float on the air more than it floated on the water. There were so many boards missing from the hull that the gray of the fog shone through, showing up the many iron cages that hung on the vessel's sides. There were oversized flames all over her. There weren't any visible containers for them, no glass, no brass, as if they were burning open and unchecked. I couldn't see my father or anyone on the deck, but I did see lots of moving shapes in those cages. I thought maybe she had been hunting large game of the sea, and the cages were perhaps holding small whales and dolphins or other things. In a moment of brutal clarity, when the ship was as close as it was going to get, I saw that there were no animals in those cages of gridded flat iron bars, but they held men that were frenzied to the point of resembling animals in a survival-driven panic. They howled out to me. They barked at each other, some even attacking each other out of desperation. She drifted back into the opacity of the fog before I could piece together any of what I had seen. My very last sight of the ship was the stern, where two unusually tall figures came as if to see me off. One was wearing a wide-brimmed hat. The other bore something like a great curved blade that could have passed as a gigantic fishhook. They were blurred in silhouette, but somehow I knew they were both looking at me. The baying of the prisoners faded, but not without one final sound that chilled me further. The bleating of a goat. It was like the croaking of a raven, like the animal had been ill. My ears tuned in obsessively to catch the sound again, but there was nothing. The whispers of the sea were all that was left. I had heard that there had been other children in Perdition Ridge before, but at the time, I was the only one. I had something like a friend among those salty, smelly old men. His name was Murphy, and he was usually done with his work an hour or two earlier than everyone else somehow. Murphy stood out. He fed the superstitions of the others and profited off of them. He had transformed a good portion of his small living area into a forge, all the parts cobbled together from ship junk and whatever washed ashore. His specialty was glass. If you brought him sand, and it had to be sand from someplace important, like where you fell in love or the site of a fellow worker's demise, he could melt it and shape it into a talisman or a charm. All of his clientele were simple drunkards, so they didn't question how or why anything he made had any power. All too often he was called upon to craft glass eyes for men who would lose an organ of sight to either injury or infection. He himself had a glass eye, and it was an effective advertisement for his services, but I often wondered if he had actually been the one that made it. Each eye he made was as close as possible to the remaining eye of the customer. The one he wore had a bizarre shape to the pupil, one that I hadn't seen since my briefest sight of a goat on Grandpa's farm. That hourglass shape that I heard an octopus's eyes had as well. Besides the shape, the color was far off too. It was like something stolen from a sea demon. He was willing to have me around and talk to me for a short while before Father would be in. I got to talk to him in most of the ways I wished that I could talk to Father, but of course I still loved Father more. Soon enough, I went from talking to learning. Murphy gradually let me learn how to create glass from sand and shape all kinds of trinkets. He even showed me how to make an eye. I once asked him if I could make a glass eye like the one he had, and that was the one single time that Murphy got mad at me. It lasted for all of 3 seconds, but it was sharp and harsh, and it caught me by surprise. But then it was over. We never spoke of it again, and it never happened again. My apprenticeship took place all without Father's knowing, of course. He would have been furious. So, in secret, I learned how to make another kind of cage, one that people wanted to be in. I would go to bed with my mind on the bag of sand that Mother gave me. Should I make it into my own talisman? Would it ruin her gift? If I were going to melt down my mother's present, it would only be when I was sure what it would be. I was about to bring myself to ask Murphy for advice on what I should craft from my secret sand. What would do justice to the love of a mother and still not draw my father's disdain? Something like that. I didn't get the chance. Perdition Ridge took my one friend from me without a chance to say goodbye. I have no idea how it started. Everyone was at the drinking hole, which meant that I could step outside and enjoy the night and listen to the strange sounds coming from the world of drinking men. Somebody slipped into inebriation first and started the Titties song. The rhythm was carried from horizon to horizon by the seawater. At some point, there was a sharp turn. The sounds of merriment soured, tinged by anger, fear, and something else. Almost what you'd expect to hear if a fire had broken out. Someone ran outside and rang a heavy, rusted bell hanging from the roof of the tavern. Another bell answered from across the water. I thought it was an echo at first. All at once, they brought old Murphy outside. Their voices were strange. You could have mistaken it for laughter, but there was no mirth. It was urgency, grief, and dismay in such high registers that it sounded eerily, fiendishly, like laughter. But it was no such thing. One and all, to the extent that their various states of inebriation allowed, they pushed, pulled, and dragged Murphy, whose voice was an amorphous howl of protest. But the peal of that strange bell only grew. The burning ship winked into sight from the murk of the night. Yes, the same ship I had seen while setting the cages. It came as close as it could to the shore without running aground. The mob surrounded the jetty and pushed Murphy out onto it. He nearly tumbled into the water. A shadow in the mist emerged with the light of a single ember that seemed to project itself for miles. It was a tall, towering figure riding in a smaller boat. Seabirds of some unnatural species clung to the smaller vessel and circled above it. The whole of the thing was moving too rapidly for a vessel that was neither driven by sail or pushed by oars. As it drew close, it became clear that it was being pulled by something else. There were men caught up inside a fishing net nailed to the hull of the ship. They swam as best as they could in the cramped quarters of the cords. Flailing, struggling to stay above water, their movements both keeping their heads above the surface and driving the ship forward. You could see the life leaving Murphy's body when he saw the foul boat coming near. The tall shadow stepped from the ship to the jetty. It might have seemed less tall if it weren't for all the skeletal birds that perched all over it. There was just enough visibility, just enough clarity of the air and sharpness of my perception to descry that the shadow was not just another grim reaper figure. It was something far worse. The birds weren't sticking around because they were official envoys. The thing wore a living, writhing coat of something that twitched and wrenched and squirmed, like a giant squid caught in a web of hooks. Dark spots on the weird garment became mouths and nostrils, and, yes, eyes. The birds jabbed and plucked at any such eyes that dared to open. My overcharged brain thought I could hear the gaping mouths trying to scream, with whispers that mingled with the ill wind of the sea. Then there was the hook. It was big enough to be a curved sword. It may have been the thing's hand, I couldn't tell, but it hung in the air like a cobra gathering itself for a strike. The thing glided towards Murphy, who was at that point squealing like a pig. He bounced off a few of the mob that were just brave enough to push him back towards the attacker before shrinking back. Despite being rusty and barnacled, and there being no sunlight, the monstrous implement flashed in its swing. It lodged somewhere between Murphy's neck and his shoulder. Murphy was pulled backwards into the embrace of the monster. The great hook became alive with subtle, even graceful and surgical movements. The birds formed a towering cyclone above the shadow as their voices fought for space with the sounds of ripping and tearing. Murphy's screams became ragged, then became gurgles. A pile of something loose sloughed onto the jetty, which the birds zeroed in on. The struggling shape that had been Murphy was somehow a size smaller, and its movements were more frenzied. Its screams were an unnatural octave higher. The towering shadow casually opened the net that held the other flailing bodies and tossed Murphy inside. As soon as he made contact with the salty water, Murphy's former shape made gyrations and squeals that shouldn't have been possible. The towering monster then shooed the birds away from the grisly pile and slung it over its shoulder, got aboard the boat, and left. The phantom boat disappeared from view, but it was a long time before the mob dared to turn their backs on the fog. Father stumbled in and made his way to bed, chanting, "Titties, titties, titties," like usual. Except this time, it was like he was trying to forget something. I wanted to ask about Murphy, but somehow I knew that I shouldn't. Some days later, I awoke to the sound of something that didn't belong on the shore. I'd been dreaming about being on Grandpa's farm again, and I wondered if I were somehow still dreaming. I cast a cautious glance at the unconscious shape of my father, who was still snoring away, before I dared to go outside. There was a goat. I had heard its soft baas drifting through our window. It was a different sort of animal. The coat was rugged, coarse, and the color of dusty coal. Its eyes were bright amber. Most startling of all were its horns. They were like calcified tentacles that twisted and snaked. It lifted its head to look at me as it chewed, but I couldn't have imagined what it had found to eat along our barren little strip of hell. Even as far as the palate of goats go, there wasn't much to choose from. It bobbed its nose at me, which I took as a sign of friendliness. It had been so long since I had been in the company of a farm animal that I couldn't resist. I reached out to pet it, and it let me. My careful rubs became scratches on its cheek. When I rubbed its chin, it spit up something into my hand. I would have recoiled in disgust if I hadn't understood right away what I was seeing. It was a glass eye. More precisely, it was Murphy's glass eye. I looked at the goat in shock. Its response? It opened another eye. A third eye, directly in its forehead. Instead of being amber like its other two, this one was red as blood in the sunlight. Then there was a pink slit in its throat, as if cut with invisible fishing line. The opening oozed something watery and pink as it moved to articulate whispered words. "Guard it well, as you would guard your soul." I scarcely had enough time to comprehend these instructions before there was a sharp cry behind me. Someone had seen the goat and raised the alarm. I cupped the glass eye close to me as there was a flash of movement all around me. The goat turned and ran into the water. It was fast, but not fast enough. Rusty spears and makeshift lances converged on the animal with deadly precision. My instincts fired off before I could think them through. I ran home while the focus of everyone else was on the goat. Father was still sawing logs, so I lifted the floorboards of my secret chest as best as I could with shaking hands and put the eye away. The cries of the goat broke my focus. The entire host of men were all gibbering the same words like coked-up seagulls. "The goat! The goat! The goat! The fisherman's goat!" The goat itself was torn apart by the brute force of hands and rusty pocket knives. Part of me figured that this was the work of men who had been on a steady diet of fish for far too long. After all, the carcass of the goat was roasted and devoured around a bonfire of driftwood, stone, and metal that evening. But there was something else still, something beyond basic hunger and desperation, something that drove the men to mount the three-eyed head of the goat on a wooden stake, something that made them dance around the head in concentric circles that were a little too well choreographed for drunk laborers. I was hunkered down in our shelter, trying to watch the whole thing from a distance, but Father burst through the door, sending it sailing across the room. He grabbed me with brute force and a deranged giggle and dragged me outside to the cyclone of intoxicated brutes. The light of orange flames glistened on the flab of salty, sweaty bodies as they gyrated around the goat's head that wasn't much more than a shadow against the evening sky. "Dance!" Father yelled at me. "Dance, you son of a bitch!" So I danced. I was both terrified of my father and elated by the fact he actually wanted to involve me in something. The spinning air reeked of sweat and alcohol, yet in some strange way, I enjoyed it. I had unconsciously drifted closer and closer to the inner ring dancing around the head of the goat. Its three eyes stared out in independent directions, and yet I couldn't shake the fact that each of them were somehow trained on me. The mirth of the mob was broken by a single, persistent cry. A group of the sailors were sifting through the final remains of the animal, carefully filleting each layer of tissue and bone, searching for something. They weren't finding what they were looking for. "There's nothing! Nothing! Come on, there's gotta be something. We've been over this 20 times. It's not here." "What about the head, then?" "It's never in the head, you know that." "But it's gotta be if it's not here. It's the rules." "God damn it, if you muck up the head, you've screwed us all. The head is sacred." The tension spread like wildfire. I was compelled to look up at the head, just in time to see the oozing slit reappear in its throat and whisper all too loudly, "Keep it a secret." That was just before a dozen clawed, drunken hands seized the stake the head was raised upon and began tearing it apart. Each horn was broken off in a separate hand. The 3 eyes were gouged out. The jaw was removed. The brain was excoriated. "You fools! You fools! It's not there either! You've broken the rules!" Somebody shrieked. "But it wasn't in the body! It had to be in the head!" "It's never in the head! It's never in the head! You've damned us all, you worthless moron!" "Shut up!" And just like that, the revelry had devolved into rivalry, and violence tindered. Fists swung in deadly arcs mere inches over my head. Hands seized me in a powerful, painful grasp and whisked me away. When I could see straight, I was back in our shanty. My father's eyes smoldered behind a face smeared with sand, dirt, sweat, and blood. His yellow teeth shone like stars. "Where is it?" he snarled repeatedly, not even giving me a chance to feign ignorance. He started banging my head against the floor with each repetition. Each blow hurt a little less, and a ringing in my ears swept me away. When I came to, I couldn't tell if it was early morning or late evening. It was just gray. Father was nowhere in sight. My head was pounding. The sound of seabirds drifted into my ears. Something about it wasn't quite right. We didn't get regular visits from seabirds unless there was something rotting on the shore. I got myself decent and stepped outside. First thing I saw was Father, standing at the far end of one of the jetties. Gulls were nipping at his fingers as he raised them skyward. I thought for a moment that the birds had softly glowing eyes. As my senses ramped up, I detected that the birds actually had no eyes at all. The ghostly pale sky was shining through the openings in their heads. Only remnants of a papery, flaking skin clung to their bodies. The same light also shone through their ribs, like the roof of Grandpa's barn. As they bobbed and weaved in my father's hands, his fingertips turned dark. One of the ghoulish things dove again, and one of the dark fingertips was suddenly a fiendish white. The roaring waves washed the sound of my father's voice back to me. It should have been crying. It should have been pain. It was laughter, a rolling, wailing laughter, like a toddler playing with a puppy. Each bird that dove came up in an arc and guzzled down something that fell through their bodies into the water. One by one, they dove faster, turned more sharply, their feeding becoming so fevered that they reached a point that their papery skin was flaking off and drifting away on the sea wind. Father laughed harder, or cried harder. I watched until he was reaching up to them with a hand of gleaming bone, the birds frustrated in their efforts to find any more flesh. I pretended to be asleep when he came back inside. I was terrified that he would hear my heartbeat thrumming through the loose floorboards. I couldn't resist trying to catch a glimpse of his hand. He kept it hidden. When we got up for the day, he wore one glove. From that day forward, I never saw him take it off. I waited until I was certain that he was gone for the day. Murphy's shelter was untouched. I fired up his forge. I took both the sand gifted me by my mother and the strange glass eye. I melted them both down and crafted the glass into a star. I never saw the stars in Perdition Ridge, just like I never saw my mother, and like I would never see Murphy again. So I made something to remember them both. I strung my new talisman up with fishing line and wore it beneath my clothes. I was setting the cages along the jetty when a hand shot out of the water and grabbed my wrist. I jumped back in alarm. 2 hands grasped at the jetty and a body pulled itself out of the water. It was a woman. Despite the decay and the disfigurement, I could tell that it was my mother. I recognized her clothes. Cloudy though they were, those were her eyes. I was torn between joy and terror. I wanted to hug her, despite the ungodly odor emanating from her. I started crying. "Mama, what happened to you?" "Your father." "What? What's that supposed to mean?" She wouldn't answer. She just stood there, her empty ribcage expanding and contracting with simulated breaths. "Where is he?" she hissed. "He's working. He'll be home tonight." "Where is home?" I led her to our shanty. She stared at it for a long moment before she began walking into the water. "Mama, where are you going?" "Say nothing," was all she said. I watched as the top of her head moved so far out and then stopped. There, she waited. It was my mother, and I was glad to see her, but something about the whole thing felt off. There was no point in staring at her all day, so I went back to work. She sat in the back of my head all day. She was clearly dead. Something inside of me kept me from exploding with grief. It was somehow caged up inside of me, away from my heart, so I could keep going through the motions of working. And that's what I did. It was another ordinary day. Father stayed out late, drinking. He came home slurring the Titties song. He didn't ask about Mother, and I didn't tell him, though I really wanted to. Was she going to live with us now? Was she just here to say goodbye? I thought about her until I fell asleep. The silence that greeted me when I awoke was anything but normal. I was usually awake before Father, and his alcohol-induced snoring wasn't subtle, but quiet reigned, and it was deafening. "Father?" I said. There he was, lying on his back, his mouth wide open as usual, but no snoring. I watched the covers. They didn't rise and they didn't fall. I leaned in for a closer look. His mouth was filled with something. Sand. Pale sand. My hand flew to my talisman. It was gone. The fishing line was still there, but the glass that I had lovingly crafted was gone. "May I come in?" boomed a bone-rattling voice. Ducking into our shanty was the fisherman. He was way too tall for our shelter. Any words that I had died in my throat. Shadows seemed to hug him, and they wrapped around his face under his wide-brimmed hat. "I apologize for all the trouble, young man, but you have something that belongs to me." He walked over to the bed, shoved his fingers into Father's mouth, and dug something out of the pile of sand. It was the fiendish glass eye I had melted down. Something interesting always happens when this gets away from me. I'll leave you to your work. My work? I'm not one of your workers, I said. The fisherman frowned. I don't have a contract with you, do I? Oh, mercy, no. No, you were here with this gentleman. I see. Well, pack your things and be ready to leave at sunset. Where am I going? Just be ready. A cargo ship that seemed barely able to stay afloat took me away from Perdition Ridge. The fishermen had somehow arranged for my grandparents to meet me at port. They were beside themselves with joy to see me. The happiness didn't last too long before I found out what had happened after Father had gone to work for the fishermen. Mother was nowhere to be found. Nobody could find her. It was like she had vanished from the face of the earth. There was no way to get in touch with Father, and not for lack of Grandpa's trying. I told them as much as I could remember about life in the shipyard, but I didn't know how to tell them about Mother. Had her talisman worked because of the glass eye, or because the sand came from where she had been left by Father? I wonder how many people are stuck with stories caged up inside of them that they have no way of setting free.
The air's filled with smoke, but to Texan farmer Dan Murphy, it was all part of his daily routine. Unlike most men, Don lived for his workdays. Even at 57, he never grew tired of the fragrant fog of burning wood, the vast blue skies, and the rich, biting taste of the honey his bees tirelessly produced. It certainly wasn't the highest-paying job, but any job that involved going outside and interacting with nature was good enough for him. There were other beekeepers in his town, but Don Murphy was a titan among them. He often joked that half his job consisted of supervising apiaries other than his own. Of all his peers, his colonies were the strongest. They accepted new queens most readily, and their combs practically bled the golden brown stuff. It always humored him how bipolar the attitudes people held toward bees were. Don knew full well that the very same people who bought jars upon jars of honey from him also complained on a weekly basis about the swarms of bees invading their backyards. At least they made up the vast majority of ill will directed toward him. The ones going off about their flowers, their honey, were the most difficult to manage. When all was said and done, they were just folks looking to weasel their way out of another Jew in life. Don valued paying his dues with hard work, the timeless equation of input plus effort equaling output. The greater satisfaction of knowing his toils ultimately made a difference. I'm one to talk, he thought with a smirk, as he smoked out his first hive. Is it really work if you enjoy it? Ignoring the befuddled bees crawling around his mesh visor, he removed the lid from the hive and pulled out a raft, smiling as he saw both sides were almost completely capped over with beeswax. First go, good job, everyone, he said, depositing the raft into a wheelbarrow. The remainder of the rafts were only half-capped. Better to let them fill up entirely before harvesting. Don covered the wheelbarrow with a tarp before moving on to the next one. He pumped a fresh round of smoke in and around the openings before taking the lid off and lifting up a raft. Oh, Jesus, no. The raft was also coated with beeswax, but only about 6 adult bees were attached. Instead of crawling among the combs doing their business, they merely hung on, antennae waving feebly, as if they'd simply lost the will to continue working. God damn it, no! Don muttered, pulling out another raft where he could only see two. The panic caused his skin to prickle as he moved toward a third raft and witnessed, with a plummeting heart, the nail in the coffin for his hive. The queen, recognizable from her plump size and painted thorax, likewise clung lifelessly onto the raft. Normally the queen was always surrounded by a convoy of worker bees, cleaning her, communicating with her. But aside from the defining traits, she might as well have been one more torpid bug in the hive. CCD, Don thought with a sinking chill. Colony collapse disorder, the mysterious condition of bees, abandoning their hives and venturing aimlessly beyond their range, where they all perished in purposeless confusion. The theories regarding CCD were as varied as the answers were few. The only certain thing about it was the frustration and fear that plagued any and all afflicted beekeepers. Why you all had to go? Don sighed, before removing all the rafts and stowing them in the wheelbarrow. If the colony had truly gone its way, he might as well reap what he could from them. As he moved to the next hive, a flicker of movement atop a distant hill caught his eye. Squinting through the mesh, he could make out a blurry dot skirting near the crest, obscured by a layer of dry scrub. Coyotes and badgers were the most common interlopers on his property, but this thing's height and gait could only mean one thing. Don dropped the wheelbarrow and drew his revolver from his waistline. "You're on private property," he bellowed out at the figure. "Get the hell out of here. I'm well within my rights to shoot." The thing stopped and shifted, as if turning towards him. Don inched closer, unable still to make out a face. "Turn back now!" The loss of one of his hives had incensed him to the point of spitting with fury, directing his rage toward the trespasser. 3 seconds! The figure seemed to bend over, then straightened up again, rocking back and forth. A gust of dry wind punched in Don's direction, and with it carried the sound of mocking laughter. Don pulled the trigger, and he fell into a split-second shock from the crack of the gun. But he ripped off his mask and stared wildly at where the figure once was. Breathing heavily, he tore through the apiary and up the hill, his bee suit catching on brambles and thorns. A stitch in his side, he arrived at the spot, looking around for any sign of an intruder. Footprints, hair, anything. Nothing. Don emitted a ragged sigh and trudged back. Despite his anger, he knew the trespasser had nothing to do with his hive. Bees would first die attempting to deter an intruder before they went so far as to abandon their home. But as he maneuvered the wheelbarrow among the rest of the hives, he wondered offhandedly how much more strangeness he'd had to put up with. Later that evening, Don and his wife Janine oversaw the extraction of the harvested honey in their garage. A brief spin in a hand-powered centrifuge sucked the liquid from the rafts, which drained through a spigot and through a sieve to catch any errant bits of wax. Despite the drama from earlier in the day, it was a decent haul, nearly 4 jars worth. A2 died today. Don grunted, tying a signature red bow around the jar. Open it up, and damn near nobody was home. Never knew a bee could look depressed, but now I know. Janine lowered her head. She, too, knew of CCD. "Why do they do that, Don?" "Wish I knew," he replied. "If I did, though, they might kill me for owning such knowledge." Janine set her jar aside. "I mean, if it ain't parasites or disease or chemicals, could they just up and decide to leave?" Decide? The word, in that context, felt like a foreign language on Don's tongue. There's a reason it's called a hive mind. Bees have no free will of their own. They'll stick to their queen until their dying breath. Apparently not. That don't mean they're not physically capable of leaving, Janine countered. If they think something's wrong, they'll jump ship. That's not free will, that's instinct. Come off it, Janine, said Don. They have nowhere to go and they die soon after. What's the point of that instinct? Janine shrugged, looking away. Maybe some things are worse than that. Don scoffed. Well, maybe when you get out there in the sun working with me, you can lecture me on the workings of bees. I'm not getting into this now. Janine snapped, an edge to her tone. She tied off the last jar and strode back into the house. I'm going to bed. Don heard her angry footsteps going up the stairs and settling in their bedroom. He shook his head and grabbed a beer from the fridge, figuring he ought to cool down even more before joining her in bed. He walked out back and settled on his chair, overlooking the desert night. The stars never failed to impress him. A liquid wash of celestial fire in the sky above. The distant buzz of bee activity had finally died down. Bees often worked into the night, but even they had to sleep at some point. The porch light above him dimmed, and he heard the clatter of insect wings. No, please, no, Don moaned, looking up. Bees affected with a parasitic maggot would often hurl themselves into lights at night, for similarly unknown reasons. Pathogenic brainworms were the last thing Don wanted to deal with after CCD. But the thing smacking itself against the light was no bee. It was much larger, about the size of his thumb, its wings clacking sickeningly on the glass. It circled erratically like a carp on a line, rendering it difficult to focus on. Don could make out a burnt orange color and black stripes, and dark, waspy eyes. Perhaps a western cicada killer, relatively innocuous despite its name. Regardless, the thing was interfering with his peaceful night, so Don reached over and switched the porch light off. Silence came creeping back, and Don leaned back in his chair, taking a drink, savoring the beer's sweet, prickly pear flavor. Listening out, Don heard nothing in the bushes beyond. He smirked. Whoever that was would not come back after being shot at. Sometimes you just gotta let some things speak for themselves, he thought, going for another sip. He shot up from his chair and sputtered frantically as the bottle touched his mouth, and 3 pairs of clawed legs grabbed onto his lower lip. He swatted at his face, dropping the beer, backing up and tripping over his chair. He made contact with something hard and sharp, but not before a shooting pain spiked the corner of his mouth. Shit! He spat, scrambling inside the house, slamming the screen door shut. He hobbled to the bathroom, turning the light on, examining his injured lip in the mirror. Blood oozed from the sting, which seethed on the sensitive skin. He cursed at his stupidity, remembering that pollinating insects were often attracted to fruity aromas. Now he would have to look forward to a swollen face in the morning. Yeah, serves me right, for being an asshole to Janine, he thought bitterly. But as he watched, the wound continued to sear without the debilitating crawl of injected venom. Don stared at his reflection for a solid 10 minutes before going to rub his lip. It hurt, but he concluded it was nothing more than a flesh wound. Strange, he muttered. Looking closer, he saw that instead of swelling, the flesh had been cleaved away, as if from a pair of mandibles. What bit me? He asked himself. Cicada killers certainly didn't bite, and Don didn't know of any other insect nests in and around the property. Whatever it was nothing he'd seen before. He washed out the wound with soap and water, squeezing the remaining blood out before dabbing it away and heading up for bed. Everything that day had been so sudden, so fucking weird. Don hoped he would find better respite in his dreams. A buzzing woke him up. Don shot up in his bed, yelping in panic, his lip pulsing with soreness. Then he realized his smartphone was merely vibrating on the nightstand. He picked it up and answered sleepily. Don Murphy. Don? It's Carla. His neighbor down the road was a regular who used his honey for baking. I'm going to need another jar soon. Don's brow furrowed. We have plenty in stock right now. You can come on over anytime. I did, Carla replied. I tried going up to your door earlier this morning, but your bees kept coming at me. One of them landed in my hair, and I said, nope, and turned right around back home. Nah, that couldn't have been, said Don, rubbing his temples. My bees don't attack people. Well, something did, said Carla, rather sassily. I'm not coming over there again, but if you'd like to bring a jar over to my place, I'd gladly accept that. Okay, sure. Goodbye. Don hung up and immediately went for his bee suit, slipping into it. He had a pretty shrewd suspicion as to what it was that attacked Carla. Janine peered drowsily at him from her spot in the bed. What's the matter, Don? Hopefully nothing. He growled, fastening his mask on. I'm just going to check something. Before his wife could follow up, he was down the stairs and bursting through the front door. The morning sun blinded him, but he couldn't see anything flying around. He examined the potted flowers, the corners of the patio, and the bushes out front. He looked up into the air to empty, cloudless skies. Then, on another gust of dry wind, came the sound of his bees buzzing. They seemed louder than normal and deeper. Shit! Don hissed, rushing round the back of his house to the yard. He rounded the corner and halted when he saw the entire apiary was storming with furious honeybees, battering Don's suit, some trying to sting him. Don brushed them off and charged into the fray. They were all hopped up on defensive pheromones, driven wild with a desire to go after anything that resembled a threat. As to what that threat was, he stopped dead when he saw it. His prize hive, A1, had been bored with jagged holes, and bees were swarming in and out of them, looping erratically around a posse of bulky, demonic hornets that were chewing their way in. Their color and sound matched the mystery bug from the night before. As Don watched in horror, the hornets simply hooked bees with their legs and decapitated them in one fluid motion, discarding their wriggling bodies to the ground below. Don exploded with a scream when he saw what laid on the ground. A virtual carpet of dying honeybees, almost all missing their heads, crawling listlessly over each other, tangling in each other's splattered innards. The hornets were emerging from the hive now, their mandibles stuffed with honey and larvae, which they devoured right before Don's eyes. Don bellowed and ran to the porch, where he grabbed a shovel and sprinted back to the hive, whacking and swinging with all his might. Solid metallic thunks assured him he had hit his mark, but the remaining hornets swirled up in a spiral and descended upon him like predatory birds. Their claws digging in, they bit into his suit and stabbed him with their stingers. Only a few hit skin around his ankles, but Don cried out in agony as the pain exploded in his feet, scorching like bullets of fire. He stamped and jumped, squashing the bugs, which burst their engorged guts over his clothes. He ran back toward the house, throwing open the screen door and slamming it shut. What happened, Don? Are you okay? Janine screamed as she bolted down the stairs. Don fell to the floor, clutching his ankles, blowing air through his gritted teeth. Close the door, the glass door, close it, he rasped. Hornets landed one by one on the mesh panel, burrowing their thick mandibles through, biting lesions through it. Get out of the way, Janine said, grabbing hold of the door. Don scooted along the floor, groaning as Janine finally slammed the glass door, locking it for good measure. The hornets gathered on the outside, their buzzing vengeful and devilish. Are the windows closed? Don demanded. Yes, they're all closed. Janine confirmed. Jesus Christ, Don. What the hell are those? Don tried to bring himself to his hands and knees, but a wave of dizziness struck him, and he fell backward to the floor and vomited. The pain was shooting electricity up his bones, invoking spasms, clouding his head. His last flash of rationale told him he'd only been stung twice or thrice, not nearly enough to cause serious damage. As tears squeezed through his eyes, he shot one last glance through the glass at his ravaged apiary and saw a man standing among the swarm. He was barefoot and fully covered with animal pelts, his eyes wide and white, and his mouth was unhinged in laughter. And the sound of it seeped through the glass, and Don convulsed again as he suddenly recognized that laugh. The jeering noise followed him into unconsciousness, and he slipped away into a void of hellish black. On the couch, Don came around, feeling as though baseballs had been stuffed under the skin of his ankles. He leaned up and saw both feet sported 2 swollen red lumps. Janine had pulled up an ottoman futon and was applying a hydrocortisone cream to his wounds. "Take this," she said tenderly, handing him a pill and a glass of water. Don swallowed the pill without taking a drink. "The hives," he croaked, looking at his wife. She shook her head. They're gone. But they were at it for hours." Don's head fell back onto the cushion as he stared unseeingly into space. 10 years of management and upkeep, of connections and dealings, gone in the span of hours. "Those things were some kind of hornet," he said. "I've never seen anything like them before." "I have," said Janine. Don looked at her and she blinked. "No, I'm sorry. I mean, I found them online. Look." She unlocked her smartphone and showed the screen to Don, who craned his neck for a better angle. A blown-up picture of one of the hornets dominated the screen, its eyes black and sinister, jaws splayed in a threatening pose. "Vespa mandarina," read Don. "Asian giant hornet. Yes, I've heard of those too. But what are they doing in Texas? And so many of them, at least a hive's worth." "I was doing more research," Janine said. "You were out a long time. They began turning up on the West Coast a few years back. Everyone thought they were isolated occurrences, but now I'm paying for it," said Don. "Those things showed up and destroyed my work. We're ruined. Don, I'm sorry, but surely we can start over, can't we?" "No." Don swung his feet onto the floor and yelped as he put pressure on them. "If these things propagate and spread, there won't be anything to start over with. They were systematic. How they butchered my bees, like that's what they're evolved to do. These things are a goddamn death warrant for people like us." "So what are we going to do then?" Janine demanded. "We'll have to get rid of them." Don stood shakily to his feet, wincing from the burning agony. "Spread the word. Start calling people. Friends, family, neighbors." He began pacing in place, working the pains out of his feet. "If they're really gone, we need pictures of the hives. That'll get people talking, that's for damn sure. Don, there's one more thing," Janine said softly. Don looked at her. "What?" Janine pointed behind him to the glass back door. Overcome with dread, Don turned around and looked. Smeared on the outside of the glass were letters, sickly yellow, studded with black specks. Don inched forward down the hallway, staring at disbelief at the words on the door. "Find me." Don mouthed the words to himself, the image of that skin-clad man in the swarm suddenly striking through his mind. He turned and looked at his wife, who stared back at him, her expression one of unsettled confusion. "Someone's doing this to us," he declared. "Someone set those things on us. But why?" "Would you know this person?" Janine inquired. No, I can't imagine anyone who'd do this to us, said Don, resuming his manic pacing. We need to call the police, then, said Janine, pulling out her phone. No, Don commanded. That won't do. We can't pin him to the Hornets. All I can say is that he was trespassing. And the police won't do shit about the Hornets, even if they could find out where they've gone. Don hobbled to the glass door, pulling his boots from the closet. I've worked too long and too hard to let this all go to waste. He fondled the top shelf, feeling around until he found his revolver. There's no one to blame for this, but that don't mean I can't do nothing about it. I'm going with you, said Janine, walking toward him. No, you're not, Don snapped. What if it's a trap? You stay here and watch the house. And if I'm not back in an hour, then you call the police. Don, Janine said simply. You and me are in this together. I'm coming with. That man's a fucking psychopath, Don shouted, advancing towards her. I'm not going to have you gutted or raped or whatever the fuck's on his mind. He tightened his grip on the revolver. I forbid you. Janine's face tightened. I don't need you to be a hero, Donald. I need you to be a husband. I am. He opened the glass door and slammed it in her face. I'm taking back our lives, because that's what I have to do. He holstered the gun and turned his back on her. Don had to fight back tears as he passed through the remains of his apiary. Half of his hives had been brutalized, each with their own mass killing of bees long dead. The other hives appeared to have been untouched. But Don walked up to one and flung the lid off, lifting a raft. Just as he thought, only a few benumbed workers and a single queen remained. They left, he said. Rather die starving and alone than face what was coming. He hesitated. How long have they been gone? During or after the assault? Or, he shuddered with forbearing, before. A rattling emanated from one of the damaged hives. The lid jerked as if something was pushing from underneath, and a single hornet crawled onto the top, coated in honey and the soiled corpses of baby bees, absent-mindedly chewing on one as it stared blankly at Don. Don stared back, drew his gun and fired. The lid blasted off, and what little remained of the hornet's mangled body fell softly to the ground. That's the least you deserve, he thought bitterly, pounding up the hill. The late afternoon sun beat down on him as he walked, scanning the vast, shrub-ridden desert, dyeing the rocks red and setting a haze in the distance. Don ruefully regretted not bringing a canister of water. He'd been more preoccupied with raining hell upon the marauder than considering his own health. His sweaty jeans chafed at his skin. His brain felt full of dusty air. But he kept his gaze on the horizon, determined to seek out the bastard, where he was hiding, and how he was controlling so many hyper-aggressive insects. Something buzzed past the back of his neck and he jolted, swatting reflexively. A hornet had zoomed past him and settled deep within a grove of desert scrub. The longer Don watched, the clearer he could hear a monotonous hum, as if hundreds of bugs were moving in unison. Let's see what the fuck kind of hive you're keeping, Don said, turning and heading for the grove. The branches were thick and bunched up against each other. He had to grab and break them away until he could squeeze through a gap. He emerged into a stony clearing and, startled, drawing his gun. I wouldn't take that shot, or else it would be your last. The apparition sneered. Don stowed the gun and glared at the man before him. Up close, underneath the shroud of pelts, Don could see he was very old, with sun-baked skin and deep wrinkles. A rabbit-skin hood obscured most of his face, but Don could make out yellow teeth and those same crazy eyes. Who the hell are you? And why are you so keen on destroying us? The old man snickered, rocking back and forth in spastic laughter. I have nothing against you, sir. You, Don leveled the gun again, you set those murder hornets on our property and killed every last one of our bees. I am far within my rights to kill you dead. Still your wrath, the old man said. No matter what comes out of this little powwow, I'm afraid you'll face the losing end. I suggest you see it through. Don kept his gun aimed at him, but his arm began to shake as fresh sweat beaded on his forehead. Who are you? That's immaterial. The old man laughed. But what I am Ye Nodlushi, only an agent of the inevitable, caught on nature's sweeping tide. What the hell does that mean? Don shouted. Colonial arrogance at its most naked, said the old man, so concerned with molding this good earth like children playing with clay, woefully ignorant to the whim of the Great Mother. Don fingered the trigger. Start talking sense. The old man leered, eyeing him for an ugly moment. You and I are a lot alike in some ways, he finally said. I, too, loathe the arrival of these winged devils. He overturned his hand, and a hornet crawled from inside his sleeve, settling in his palm. When they enacted their scourge, I asked myself, how could this have happened? What did we do to deserve such unholy misery? His head twitched, and his neck gave a gnarly crunch. But I reminded myself each action must have a consequence. And this is no more apparent than in the colonial arrogance I endure each and every day. He bared his decrepit teeth at Don. When you spread your roots and shook hands with the rest of the world, did you really not expect to transmit a few germs? As Don listened with disgust, he realized that the buzzing, at first silenced, had begun to well up again. But the old man continued to talk. When you dig a canal, the water flows and things change forever. That is not a result of your ingenuity. That is just nature taking its course. What is happening here is nature taking its course, no matter how wicked and backwards that may be. He grinned again. That is where you and I are very different. You are a suppressor. I am its emissary. You did this because we think we're above nature? Don figured. The buzzing had grown louder. He had to shout to make himself heard. But I'm a beekeeper. Bees are endangered as they are. I keep them. They pollinate and thrive. How am I the bad guy? Why do I deserve this? Swallow your vanity, the old man snarled. You did nothing to deserve this. All I've done is ensure the consequences. Your bees were smart enough to leave their hives because they too went with nature's course. And you, standing in its way, propped up tall with your pride, will suffer the humiliating indignity of... Don shot the old man. He shuddered from the impact, his face frozen in mid-speech. Some yellow, glutinous juice frothed at his lips. His body gave an almighty tremor, and his pelts fell to the ground. Don let out a piercing shriek. The old man's bare skin from the neck down was peppered with a geometric pattern of holes, the texture of honeycomb, and crawling in and out of the flesh were thousands of hornets, the source of intensifying buzz. His eyes degraded into jelly, and 2 hornets burst forth from them, scuttling over his bald scalp, but the thing still cracked a smile. I warned you. It would be your last. Don scooted backwards, distancing himself from the creature, but it shambled towards him, trembling at its knees. I am Chaos, skinwalker to the winged devils. His voice was amplified and garbled, as if filtered through the hornets themselves. And while whittling through his powwow, I've unleashed chaos elsewhere, for such is its nature to strike with tenacious dispassion. No! Don bellowed, realizing instantly what he'd meant. He turned and crashed through the bushes, his feet blazing with fresh pain, limping as fast as he could back over the hill, where his house was, where his wife was. The buzzing hit an ungodly pitch behind him, and he upped his pace, threatening to trip and fall forward with each step. The settling sun was plunging the rocks into formless shadow. His foot struck a cactus, and he screamed, pushing forward against the spine in his toe. The hill was just ahead. He clambered up it and threw his gaze down the slope to his house. And beyond his ruined hides, motionless at the center of the house, a figure writhed on the ground, surrounded by a gyrating swarm of hornets. No! Janine! Don screamed. He tumbled down the hill in his haste, colliding with rocks and shrubs, sliding to stop among a field of gravel. Broken, scraped, and in excruciating pain, Don crawled on the ground, blubbering madly, tears mixing with the blood in his mouth. Janine, please, no! He arrived at her side, riddled with pain, enduring fresh stings, staring down in tear-stricken horror. His wife's clothes were soaked through with red pinpricks, and every inch of her exposed skin was covered with swollen, necrotic sores. His hand reached for her head, but he stopped himself. He wanted to remember his wife's face as it was, beautiful, clean, and unmarred. As the venom pumped through his blood, he summoned a last jolt of energy and staggered to his feet, stumbling for the porch door. He grabbed the handle, leaning forward on it, and collapsed inside, finally kicking it shut. Immediately, a hail of hornets drilled into the glass, their durable exoskeletons resounding in sickening thunks. They chewed at the glass so close Dawn could see their individual mouthparts, flexing and glittering. Then they scurried beyond the door, onto the outside walls. They'll get in. If they want to, they will. He hauled himself across the floor, his body racked with toxins, the furniture swimming freely in his vision. He ended up in the living room, next to the couch Janine had treated him on. The water and medicine still sat on the table. Crawling towards it, he splashed the water on his face and downed a handful of antihistamines. It did nothing to quell the venom, but he could think clearer now. She was right, he whispered, his eyes reddened from crying. They knew. They fled, or at least some of them did. The hornet's buzz echoed down from up the chimney. Don turned his head to stare at it. Slumped against the futon, the bones in his limbs tingled uncomfortably, then fell limp beside him. The scatterplot of stings around his body flared with an acid kick, signifying his flesh had begun to dissolve. Something inhuman was creeping down the chimney, dripping its honeydewed blood. A few scouts had already emerged, hovering slowly above Don's shattered body, as if smelling his imminent death. Illuminated in a shaft of moonlight, the skinwalker reached its gangly arms from the chimney, dragging its way up the wall, gripping it with slender talons. A convoy of hornets clung to it like spiderlings. It twisted its neck to peer down at Don. Pity, it drooled. You too tried to flee, defiant of nature to your dying breath. Emitted an insectoid chatter. Ignominy will be your coffin. Paralyzed from the neck down, Don tore his eyes away from the skinwalker, laying them instead on the medicine and water, the last things he saw Janine hold in her hands. His lips tightened with grief. could still smell her perfume in the air, underneath the putrid scent of carrion and peat. Something laid on the floor next to the futon. Dawn squinted to focus on it. It was her smartphone. Dawn recalled the moment he'd come to. She was there, showing him that phone, relaying knowledge to him in her angelic voice. She knew about the Hornets. She knew about CCD. She knew. Dawn turned again to face the creature. He could feel the stiffness rising up his throat. Nevertheless, he spoke up. "End me, then," he gurgled. "But one day, you'll have to face the inevitable." "I am the inevitable," the skinwalker rasped. "You may have beaten me, but there are others out there, too. And like it or not, people are a part of nature, too." Dawn drew one final breath into his blackening lungs. "And when the chips are down, you'll find that those others will come roaring back, once they know how to beat you. You think you're some freaking higher being, but you're part of this just like everything else. Everyone else. And once we know how to deal with you, nature will, in due time, take its course." The skinwalker bared its teeth, its limbs trembling, with the effort to hold itself up. Dawn stared it down, forcing himself to remain lucid until the end. "Kill!" it hissed. As the hornets descended upon him, Donald Murphy felt the stirrings of something inscrutable and intangible, but somehow necessary, and all too real in spite of everything that had happened. Assurance.
Back in Hudson with my last caper far in my rearview mirror, I had plenty of time to stew in my own juices. I was used to running my own show, and even though I was usually on somebody else's dime, Frank Infield was nobody's patsy. First thing back at my hotel, I crawled under the covers with my old buddy Johnny Walker and his pal Do Not Disturb, and slept like the dead for 3 days. Got up when I woke up, showered, and made a beeline for the post office to pick up my mail.
Mr. Renfield, I'll make you a deal. You go on one last little errand for me, and when you return, if you choose to return, we can decide to continue our arrangement. Or I can pay you off and send you on your way. Deal? Go out west to New Mexico, a place called Las Cruces. A secluded little desert burg that can be quite charming in its way, I'm told. Once there, secure a sound vehicle, and then find Coyote and seek his counsel. Sorry for being so cryptic, but it's in the nature of the journey, I'm afraid.
That's all it said, signed as usual, Mr. Knight. No fond farewells or anything. Just the assumption I'd jump on the next train, only finding out what I was after when I got there and made contact. See, Mr. Knight was some sort of juju man. I'd never met him, but he'd contacted me some years back through an ad I'd placed looking for detective work. No job turned down, ever. And since then, I'd never looked back. Searching the world for things Mr. Knight wanted found. There's some damn good yarns in there over the years, but for now I was headed west.
Say, fella, you believe in Coyote, do you? I mean, really believe?
The guy in the battered old Stetson drawled as he poured my whiskey and shoved it toward me across the bar with a stump of a hand missing a couple of fingers. It looked as if I was off and running, and I'd only been in New Mexico for a few hours. I tossed the shot back and slammed the glass down with a nod. "'Cause if you do," he picked up where he'd left off after pouring another, "then you know if he wants you, he just trots right up and hoists his leg and marks you as his own. He doesn't even ask if you're interested or not, or what gods you pray to or don't, or the color of your hide or who your pappy's kin are. Then again, maybe he just needed to take a piss, and you got in the way." The guy started roaring and slapping his knee, and the other dozen or so other grizzled characters in their dusty leathers and boots joined in. I laughed too because it was pretty funny. That must have been my price of admission, because the guy quit laughing and turned serious, staring me down. "You looking for Coyote, are you? But don't bother denying it. I can always tell," the guy said, spitting something in a cup he lifted up from behind the bar. "Or maybe he's already found you." Looking is all at this point, I guess. He real? A man with an address I can look up? Or a myth, old yarn, or what? I was winging it here, looking for information but keeping it light. "What?" the guy said, finally looking up at me. "You thought Coyote was a man? Or some kind of wild dog? Or maybe just a spirit from the before times, yeah? Well, I'll tell you something, all right? Coyote, he ain't none of them things. And he's all of them rolled up with spit and glue and a whole lot more nobody will ever know about. Now you go looking for Coyote out there in his desert, you can count on one thing, son. He'll find you. And you don't need no damn address," he bellowed, and all the old-timers started busting up again. "This one's on me. Now, drink up and get," the bartender snapped as he filled my glass one last time and jabbed what was left of his thumb toward the clock behind him. "Closing time." I finished my drink and headed to the flop house I'd booked for the night. The guy at the desk told me about another guy down at the garage who could rent me an old Ford for a few days. When I'd picked up the keys, he'd given me the lowdown on the Ford's peculiarities and advised me to fill as many cans of gas as I could afford and she could hold, and a few more of water, or I'd be dead before I crossed half the desert between here and somewhere else. So I took his advice and at sunrise hit the road in search of Coyote, whoever or whatever he was. Beyond the city limits, it was one desolate stretch of road, just flat gray earth, empty as far as the eye could see in all directions of anything but scrub and a few jackrabbits. But I was glad to be out there and figured it was good to have time to think things over. Just past sunset that first day, I spotted a pair of headlights coming up fast on my tail. For no reason, it kinda spooked me. Probably because I hadn't seen anybody on the road all day, and only a lone figure on horseback off in the distance now and then. I slowed and let them pass. Another old pickup like the one I was driving. The two guys inside looked me over hard, and then floored it and roared on ahead as I fell back a ways to put some distance between us. A couple of hours later, I saw more headlights in my rearview mirror, and without thinking, I floored it, not sure if I could outrun anybody. To where, I had no clue, but I felt something pricking on the back of my neck, and it said, "Run." The lights disappeared for a while, and I slowed and drove at an easy clip. But then the headlights appeared again just as the moon started to dip. They caught up with me and pulled up alongside, and I could see it was the same pickup and the two guys again, which just wasn't possible. The grizzled old driver grinned at me like a maniac and then started hooping and hollering. Then they ran me off the road and my truck crashed straight into a ditch and came to a halt. The two guys, obviously rough fellas, were still grinning as they climbed out of their truck and sauntered up to me. I reached for my .38 and cursed, remembering I'd stowed it in the glove compartment. I decided to let them open the bidding as my jacks or better were safely out of reach in the pickup. "What do we got here?" The driver, and the guy in charge, I figured, said as he spit something dark and runny onto the ground. "What can I do for you fellas? I'm not from around here. You got me mixed up with some other fella, maybe?
Maybe not, Sonny-o. You looking for Coyote?
The other one said. This one was a lot younger, and I realized he was the balls and brains of the outfit, and twice as mean-looking than the dumb lug who lumbered from boot to foot beside him grinning.
We're looking for him, too. And we got calls. Yes, sir, we do. You a pal of his or what?
Looking for him? Nah, not me. Never heard of him until this morning a few miles back in Las Cruces, when some jokers in a bar were telling stories about him. Mostly just making fun of me, out-of-towner and all, I said. He stiff you boys on some drinks or what? I added, trying to sound like I just wanted to get back on the road.
Yeah, well,
the young guy said absently, looking around and stretching.
That don't seem right, but what we know. Skink, the barkeep back at the Agua Caliente, said you was looking for Coyote. Came in asking for him by name and everything. Now, you got business with that boy the way we do, then we don't got much need for interlopers, and we'll do for you just like we will Coyote. Now, if you're his kin or his pal, then you're taking us to him. Which'll it be?
The guy drew a length of rope off his belt and started towards me, while the other one pulled a huge knife out of his boot and started grunting. I just stood my ground glaring at him. There was nowhere to run and no way I could take out the both of them, disable the truck and take off in mine before they had me trussed up like a pig for the spit. So I balled up my fists and readied myself to give as good as I got, except for the knife, of course. Steeling myself for the onslaught of blows and locking eyes with the young guy as he barreled headlong towards me with his pal, I didn't notice the sudden rush of wind and the blur that flew into my field of vision, and grabbed the two guys and wadded them up like a bunch of old newspaper and threw them in a heap to the ground. Then the blur was gone, and everything was silent except for a sick gurgling from the mangled heap of meat that used to be the young guy and his old sidekick. The only thing missing from them was their throats. Dashing to the pickup, I grabbed my .38 and prepared to make a stand. But nothing happened. I didn't think there was anything out here in the desert big enough and fast enough to do that to two grown men and then just disappear. So I was thinking maybe it was some Indian magic, what they call medicine around here. A thing I had absolutely no goddamn knowledge of whatsoever. I holed up in the car with my gun drawn for several minutes, but nobody else showed up, and all around it was just too quiet. I was about to get back on the road, figuring whatever had done this could find me if it wanted to, when another pair of headlights came out of nowhere, and then a rusty old pickup pulled off the road and the driver killed the lights and engine. Steeling myself for the next round of the scuffle, I marveled at the guy who climbed out of that truck. He was about my height, around 6 foot, in dusty jeans and ratty-looking worn boots, and nothing but a fringed leather vest topside. His lean, muscled chest tanned dark as his boots. He sported a thin 3-day beard, and his reddish-yellow hair was done up in long braids, and he wore a beat-up old black felt hat with a feather in it. I took him for an Indian at first, but Spidey screamed no. So I worked my hand magic and set my guard around me, and grabbed my juju moppet in my pocket.
Say, Crow, them bounty hunters friends of yourn?
The stranger said, walking up to the bodies and kicking their boots. He couldn't possibly think they were still alive. I didn't know who he was talking to, since there was nobody else there. No, I said, looking around.
Oh, don't mind me. I call everybody Crow.
I'd never laid eyes on those two before today, but they meant me harm and something saved my keister last minute. I answered, taking my measure of the guy.
Good,
he said, spitting to the side. Then he did something that floored me and forced a choke out of my mouth. The stranger unzipped his jeans and pulled out his manhood, and then pissed all over the bodies while roaring with laughter. Bounty hunters, eh? Well, I'm gonna get back on the road, I said, easing my way back to the pickup.
You ain't going nowhere in that old heat. Her days are up. Axle's broke, 2 flats in the front. She's done for,
he said, removing his hat and putting it over his heart, and making some sign with his hand in the air. Just like that, the switch flipped from normal folks' view to Spidey's territory. There was no way this guy could have seen what was wrong with my truck in the dark, and the speed with which he moved made me shiver.
Besides, you go looking for a feller, and he finds you first and saves you from a jam. You owe him a thank you and a shot of something good to drink. What you got on you?
He said with a grin, his strange yellow eyes lighting up like a kid on Christmas morning. I'm guessing I'm in the company of none other than Coyote himself. That about right? I asked. And you did for these two here in some way of yours?
That's about right, Crow. And you best jump in this here pickup of mine. When she fires up, she don't wait for nobody.
Where are we going? I asked, climbing in the passenger side.
We'll see when we get there. You ride with Coyote, you gotta take your chances.
We rode for a few miles in silence except for Coyote whistling something, and then mumbling under his breath. After a while, I just had to know. You said back there I was looking for you.
That's right, Crow. A man always comes looking for Coyote at a certain fork in his road. Got no choice. Say, you got any booze on you?
He asked a little too eagerly.
Or some smokes?
What? No, I got nothing on me except a change of clothes and a bedroll. I was really getting mad, thinking I'd gotten mixed up with the wrong guy. He had no finesse like the usual magical types I'd encountered along the way. But deep down I knew I'd found Coyote, whatever he was, and knew in the fullness of time, like always, the cards would all get dealt on the table.
All right. Well, let's camp here for the night,
he said, pulling off into the dirt a ways from the road.
Let me see what I can rustle up. Some grub, maybe. See if some other crow around these parts has some drink I can barter or steal. Or find somebody who owes me a favor. Plenty of them around.
I pulled my duffel bag out of the back and a thin bedroll of Coyote's and set up camp, such as it was. Then he built up a big fire and I settled down. Coyote jumped back in his truck and tore off without a word, leaving me staring at his taillights. I had no idea if he'd be back, if he had gone looking for people who owed him, or what he could steal in the way of grub and booze. Or if he was just having fun at my expense. So after a bit, I rolled up in my blankets and fell asleep. Something made me jerk wide awake, and I sat bolt upright. Coyote's truck was back, parked by the side of the road, but he was nowhere in sight, and the fire was down to nothing but a few red coals. Everything was dead quiet. I was about to go back to sleep, figuring he had just gone off somewhere to relieve himself, but then jumped in surprise when the fire roared up to a blaze and seemed to light up the whole desert. 2 corpses swung by their feet from a nearby tree not 20 feet from where I'd been sleeping. There'd been no tree when we settled down for the night, and sure as hell no corpses. I could see it was the 2 guys who had attacked me on the road, the bounty hunters. Coyote wandered into the camp and stared at the sight while scratching his backside. "That wasn't here when we made camp," I hissed, my eyes bugging out of my head.
Course not, you damn fool. You think I'd settle us down here for the night with them shades dangling there?
Where'd they come from?
Don't matter. What matters is we don't let a chance like this slip through our mitts. Now, since you're the greenhorn and all, I'll do right by you and let you go first,
Coyote said with a bluster of pride. Go first? What do you mean?
Well, at taking the damn things down, of course,
Coyote barked, rolling his eyes like he was talking to an idiot.
Which one do you want? Take your pick, but get on with it. We don't got all night. These things go sour on you if you take too long getting them down. You ever smell one of these things that's gone sour on you?
Gone sour? What the hell are you talking about? I roared, jumping to my feet. I don't want a damn corpse. What the hell am I supposed to do with a dead man? And besides, how'd they get here? Who did this? Strung them up like this? You?
You saying you don't want one of these things?
Coyote grinned, his eyes narrowing a bit, and a little grin twisting the corners of his lips as he ignored my question. Hell no!
You're sure and all?
I'm sure as shit.
Last chance.
Coyote drawled. I don't want a damn corpse, I growled, feeling the bile churn and my hackles rise. I'm asking you, man, who did this to these guys?
Well, alrighty then,
Coyote roared, sidling up to the corpses and cutting one down where it fell to the ground with a sickening soggy thump. It was the damnedest thing I'd ever seen. Coyote turned his eyes on me, and for the first time I saw how they twinkled with something ancient, and a far cry from human. And I remembered what the barkeep had said. This wasn't just some rangy cowpoke who called himself Coyote. This was the real deal, and I had no idea what that meant. Then he grabbed the dead man and shook him out as thin as a sheet but dark as midnight and almost invisible. Coyote carefully folded it up like an old newspaper and stuck it into his back pocket. Then he took down the other one and did the same, but before folding it up and hiding it away somewhere, he tore off a piece and started chewing on it, licking his lips and grunting with satisfaction. Then he tore off some more and shoved it in my face. I almost puked where I stood. Coyote roared with laughter and slapped his knee.
You don't want none. Damn good eating jerky if you ask me. Don't know when we'll get any more like it,
he said, turning away and doubling over laughing.
Come on then, get your gear. We need to get back on the road by daybreak, or these fellers will come looking for what we took off them.
What do you mean? What are those things? Who will come looking for them?
Crow, you gotta know a thing. Horse thieves and bounty hunters don't leave behind nothing but a shadow when they's hung. Don't you know nothing besides your own name and where to wipe?
A shadow? What good's that for?
Well, if you don't know, then there's no harm waiting till we need one for you to find out. Now, get your gear.
Coyote ordered, and then set off through the scrub, leaving the truck behind. We must have walked for a good 2 hours, Coyote bounding ahead and me lagging behind before he fell into step beside me.
You hungry?
Yeah, you find anything? I said, and he just threw his head back and howled. Then he bounded off toward the horizon and disappeared from sight. All I could do was stand there in shock. He came back a little while later carrying a big turtle under his arm. He sat down in the dirt and turned the turtle over, then cracked the shell gently on the belly with the handle butt of a knife he kept stuck in his belt behind his back. Coyote scooped out the live turtle and shoved it toward me, but I had no idea of what he wanted me to do.
Here you go. Now swallow her quick and whole and she won't bite,
Coyote said. What the? I yelled, gaping at the sight. I'm not eating that. Coyote shrugged but didn't say a word. He just opened his mouth and swallowed the turtle whole in one gulp. Why'd you kill it? We could have found something else, I demanded, beginning to regret this whole setup. That this was the coyote I'd been sent to find was clear, but I still had no idea what to do besides play along as best I could. But this was where I drew a line. I sat there and watched as Coyote went to work. Picking up a knot of something he called sage, he scrubbed the shell clean, then rubbed sand all over it till it was smooth and shiny. Then he shoved it into his back pocket where it disappeared without a trace despite the size of the thing.
Come on, we still got a ways to go and nobody's getting any younger,
Coyote said, heading back to the pickup.
I'm still driving,
he said, and I nodded without a word and jumped in the passenger side. The next day, we were making good time down the road to nowhere when Coyote slammed on the brakes and pulled off the road, sending me almost through the windshield. "Now what?" I asked, rubbing a knot that was already forming on my forehead.
"Well,"
Coyote said in that long drawn-out way of his.
"now we wait."
He said. "Wait? Wait for what?" I demanded, getting a real mad on.
"We're not waiting for anything. We're just waiting."
"That's it," I said, jumping out of the truck. "I'm out of here."
"Suit yourself,"
said Coyote, shielding his eyes from the sun and grinning over at me. Then he got out of the truck and laid down against his bedroll and went back to his business of just waiting and staring off toward the horizon. "I'm going," I said, meaning it more this time than the first, but still just standing there with my hands in my pockets.
"So you said. Happy trails."
"All right, I'm heading back. Give me the keys."
"There's only one way back from here, Crow. You know that. And it sure as hell ain't in my pickup."
"And what would that be, damn it?" I growled. "I'll hitch a ride if I have to," I barked, and then remembered we hadn't seen another car on this road in a day and a half.
"South. Not the way you come. Only one way to get anywhere from here is to head due south,"
he said, waving his arm and sticking a bony finger in the direction I took to be due south. He looked at me but didn't do a thing. "All right then, but at least answer me something."
"I might,"
said Coyote.
"if I feel like it."
He added with a cackle. "Okay, now, I thought you were going to teach me some stuff," I said, feeling righteous and cheated on. "That is what I came looking to Coyote for," I added, glaring at him.
"Teach you some stuff? Huh. I look like a schoolmarm to you?"
"Yeah, and you haven't showed me anything. You just made me look at a bunch of weird nonsense and a whole lot more nothing."
"Is that a fact?"
"That is a fact."
"Okay, then. What about this corpse shadow I got here in my backside? And the one I ate for lunch?"
Coyote asked, digging around behind him and pulling out the black shadow of the bounty hunter and dangling it in my face.
"You don't see some high coyote medicine in this shade?"
He growled through his teeth in my face. "No, friend, I do not," I growled back.
"Well then, let me show you a thing,"
said Coyote.
"Now you look here real close like, and listen twice as hard."
I crossed my arms and took a stance, but I wasn't inclined to believe much of anything at that moment.
"All right. I can see you don't think much of Coyote's medicine,"
he said, holding up the shade by the top of its head. "But I ain't seen no—" Before I could even get the word out, Coyote stepped into the shade and disappeared from sight. "What I gasped. Then the shade appeared again, and out stepped Coyote, who folded it back up and stuffed it into his back pocket. "Damn!" I yelled.
"That's right. Damn fine coyote medicine dangling right in front of your nose, and you don't even see it coming. Now you listen to this. One of Coyote's best medicines is his way of hightailing it back and forth, to and fro to anywheres he sets his mind to. And I do mean anywhere on this earth or anywhere else. You get it?"
"I get it," I muttered.
The shades are great for getting out of all sorts of jams. The strung-up bounty hunter variety, well, they're the best ones for a long-distance travel, and they last longer than most shades. Why, I bet I get a good 10 passes out of each one before I got to bury them in the dirt and wash myself clean of it. No, sir, can't do any sort of coyote business without them shades."
"Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, marveling despite myself at this whole new kind of magic I'd never seen nor heard nor fathomed before, not even with Mama Cartwright.
"Because you was too damned impatient. I asked you if you wanted one of them. Even said you could take first cut and grab the one you wanted. But no, you wanted nothing to do with it. so I saw no damned reason not to take both of them for myself.
He said with a chuckle. Well, is that all there is to it then? I asked, calming down and getting used to the idea of Coyote traveling through the shadows to unnamed places.
Is that all there is to it?
Coyote howled in his best mocking tone, laughing so hard he had to hold onto his sides. I could feel myself turning red as a blister and had to look away.
No, it ain't all.
Coyote yipped. Then he sidled up real close and looked me dead in the eye.
That ain't all but a long shot,
he said, almost in a whisper, and this time his eyes weren't laughing. Then he sat down and pulled the turtle shell from his backside pocket.
What about this?
Coyote asked.
You said you was hungry.
Well, I was, I said, trying to contain my anger. But I don't care much for turtle cooked, much less raw, and I don't eat anything alive. What do you take me for?
I take you for somebody who was hungry to learn a thing or two about the coyote medicine way. Seems I was wrong.
I do, but what's some damn turtle got to do with it?
Well, it's got a whole lot to do with it. I scoured those hills looking for a turtle who'd give himself up for you. None of them wanted anything to do with some silly ass from back east still green to all the way of things. But finally this old turtle woman said she hadn't got long to live, so she was happy to help Coyote out in a pinch, and for a good cause.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the coyote medicine rattle I made for myself out of one of their shells long ago in the before time. I use it to call things to me. Friends sometimes, allies mostly. Crow more often than not. The real crow. Why, Coyote even calls down the stars themselves with that rattle, and they dance with him and sing around his bonfire on the coldest night of the year. It's like a tradition. Been going on for some while now. Long before your kind ever came.
But...
Now hush your yap. You ask Coyote something, you keep your yap shut till he's done telling it. That was gonna be your own rattle, to start learning the coyote way of calling things you need. You never see Coyote carrying a sack or anything of the like, but have you ever seen him come up short of his needs? No, sir, you have not, and you can't bet the ace of spades you never will.
We sat for a while on a huge rock, me just staring into space and Coyote staring at me. After a while, he poked me with the toe of his boot. What? I mumbled.
Ain't you gonna ask me what I'm doing now?
asked Coyote, laughing again. I know what you're doing.
And what's that?
You're waiting. Just waiting.
Well now, we're getting somewhere,
roared Coyote.
And what exactly is this waiting?
Oh, how the hell do I know? Just killing time, I guess, while you figure out what to do. How do I know?
Yeah, I suppose you're right,
said Coyote.
Then again, maybe it's like this. One of the biggest pieces of the coyote medicine way is his waits. You've heard it before, I know you have. Coyote waits. There's songs called that. And stories too, lots of them. You ever wonder why?
Don't know, and don't much care at this point.
Sure, you don't much care. You got better things to do. Best get out there walking. I saw Death out there nosing around, and he was asking after you. But let me tell you about Coyote and his waiting around. If you have a mind to hear, and you want to keep that old boy out there waiting a bit longer.
I just nodded, certain that if I wandered out there alone, Death would indeed cart my ass off.
If I sit here on this rock long enough, it'll be tomorrow, or next week, or 100 years from now. Just like you,
Coyote said with a howl of laughter.
But here's the thing. Coyote waits a whole lot faster than you do. So 100 years of Coyote time ain't the same as your time. I sit here like this for an hour, if I have a mind to, and it'll be 10 years or more gone by. That's the waiting forward part. But then there's the waiting backwards part of the thing. Where if Coyote waits long enough, it's yesterday, or last week, or 100 years ago, or even the before times.
Well, now that's something, I admitted, finally taking an interest in where this could be going and how it might be useful to me in my dealings with things in my line.
Coyote waits sideways, too. Not only between now and then, but between here and there. There is any place at all outside the world that's any place at all except here. If I hanker to go there, hell, it don't even have to be a real place. I just up and go. You get my drift?
Coyote had one eye arching towards me like he was hoping I'd say something that wasn't just plain stupid. I got it.
So the way I see it, that's 3 kinds of coyote medicine you got no damn use for. So there's nothing left for you now except to head south. You'd best get on your way. Nightfall is no kind of place for a guy with no medicine,
said Coyote as he shook his head and then closed his eyes and went to sleep.
And that little rag doll in your pocket? It ain't no good out here,
he added, without opening an eye. I just sat there, not even sure what to do. I could head back south, but I'd never been much good at south. South would mean admitting I'd come up empty-handed. I could wake Coyote now, but it'd just be more of the same. So I waited until he was snoring like a tornado. Then I rifled through his pockets and pulled out the shade. I let it flap in the breeze a bit. Then I stepped inside. Behind me, I could hear Coyote tossing in his sleep, laughing. There was nothing here but the night sky above and below and all around as far as I could see, and it was filled with stars, and the sound of Coyote laughing at me. Before long, the mad wore off, and I started laughing at myself too, knowing nothing at all mattered except the coyote medicine, the juju, the hoo-ha, the magic, and all the stuff I was steeped in up to my eyeballs and past the gills to either swim in like a champ or drown laughing. Sometime later, when I was back inside myself again, Coyote came up to me and looked me in the eyes.
Well, I suppose you're ready to learn a thing or two now,
he said. I went all cold inside, even after everything I'd seen so far. He stepped around behind me and grabbed a hold of my hair while pulling the big buck knife out of his belt. I could hear the sound of him ripping the back of my shirt open. I went stiff when he pinched a handful of skin on my neck and pulled it tight like I'd seen Mama Cartwright do to a rabbit. I saw the stars again when he cut into me, when he sliced open the skin down my back from my neck to my butt. He was pulling it off me, slow and careful, skinning me alive right where I stood, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. I just looked up into the sky as the sun melted like golden tears over the mountains and all the stars came back one by one. Next thing I knew, Coyote was sitting around the fire grinning at me, and I was looking back at him with some kind of new eyes. He was cutting my skin up into pages and sewing them into a book, and then he stuck that book in his pocket too. He was polishing up my spine bones and throwing them down, scattering them all around, waving his hand over them and telling futures with them in tall tales. I saw he had my leg bones too. He'd made a rain stick out of one of them and the drum beat with the other and painted them all over with signs and portents. There was a big crow sitting on his shoulder now, and I wondered if it was somebody I knew. Then figured probably not. Without a thought, I dropped down onto my all fours and bounded off into the night to count the stars in the far black sky and to sing them my very own medicine song. That's how it all happened. It was a long, long time ago now. Not sure how long exactly. Maybe 3 days, maybe 4, maybe as much as a week. With Coyote, you didn't have to pretend anything, least of all, even to be human. It's all about the magic with him and nothing else, except the book Coyote made out of my own hide while I let him do it to me, and the fact nobody'll ever read what's written down there except me. I had the shade folded up in my back pocket, and how I could still get 7 or 8 good passes out of it. I had the rain stick too, and the drum beater that had been my legs, and the telling bones that was my spine. I think once or twice I even smiled at the remembering. You see, when Coyote laughs and dances you up and down under the stars, and he won't quit till his side split open, and you think he's going to pee himself, and death is out there somewhere asking after you, you better dance with him. Because heading south is just no way for a man, a magic man, a juju man, a man born to strange medicines, to live.
Chilling tales for dark nights.